Chapter 726. What? Xueqi was shocked. What's going on? Why did they attack the Dalajan directly? In history, Arthas had led his army from the west to the east. He had first defeated Xueqi, then returned to the Magic Kingdom and overturned the Dalajan. Even Gilnis was beaten to the point that he could not take care of himself and was forced to release the werewolves. If it wasn't for the fact that Archimonde, one of the two commanders of the Burning Legion, had more important work to do, and that Arthas was busy heading to the Kalimdor continent, it wouldn't be surprising for the Calamity Army to wipe out the entire Eastern Kingdom. However, the report said that they only found a large number of low-level undead. This news made Xueqi a little uncertain. Although the Calamity Army had many types of soldiers and powerful monsters, the core of the undead was still the Liches and Death Knights. In reality, the core of the undead was still the commanders, the Liches and the Death Knights. Without a Lich or a high-level Death Knight acting as the mastermind, the zombies would just be a motley crew. Xueqi frowned. Call the mages in charge of sending messages. I want to start a public, remote meeting at the throne level. A few minutes later, more than 10 mages and their magic mirrors filled the tent. The next moment, from Silvermoon City in the Elven Kingdom of Xueqi to Stormwind City in the south, every throne-level communication room rang with the most urgent call. In every communication room, the mages in gorgeous magic robes widened their eyes in horror. They almost suspected that they were hallucinating, and suspected that the magic communication that rarely went wrong was fake news. The next moment, they shouted at the top of their lungs, "Guards!" What? Xueqi is back? Lord Darren has fallen? Whether it was the sudden return of Xueqi, who had been missing for 10 years, or the fall of Lord Darren, they were both major events for the entire alliance, not to mention the two combined. This extremely sensational news was no less than a huge spiritual nuclear explosion. Magni Bronzebeard sprinted from his personal blacksmith's forge back to the throne with his short legs. Anduin Lothar, who had been ignoring politics for many years, almost rushed into William's throne room. Even the kings of the three kingdoms that had long since left the alliance had to stop what they were doing and rush to the magic mirror. This was because the person who was about to make the announcement was the legendary hero of the alliance, Duke Marcus. In the pitch-black magic communication mirror, there seemed to be a small flame burning. In the blink of an eye, it spread from a small flame to the entire mirror that was as tall as 2 people. Rustle! It was clearly the sound of magical waves, but it felt as if the entire palace was shaking. A familiar yet unfamiliar figure appeared on the mirror. Xueqi. It really was him. Even though he looked a little more mature, it was only in terms of temperament and not appearance. It was as if the time in the void had frozen his age. From the looks of it, Xueqi still had the face of a young man who was not even 20 years old. Could it be that Xueqi wouldn't age? Quite a few kings secretly bared their teeth. In fact, the kings had indeed guessed correctly. Xueqi had received a gift from Alexstrasza, the giver of life. His age had been eternally fixed at 18 years old. Duke went straight to the point. I'm back. I'm back at a rather bad time. This time, it was no longer an illusory prophecy, but a real crisis that threatened the entire world. The Burning Legion's plot succeeded, and killed Jaden made the third great chief of the Horde, Nazul, who was defeated by us last time, a Lich King. Xueqi had sufficient evidence and some spoilers. Especially the exaggerated descriptions of certain situations. It made the king shudder even though it was not cold. What? You're saying that if we leave Arthas's Scourge army alone, he will break through the Sun Well and summon Archimonde the Defiler, one of the two commanders of the Burning Legion? Xeon Grameen frowned deeply. Yes, that's right. Xueqi said with absolute certainty. He had originally thought that throwing out a rare enemy like Archimonde would be good enough to scare the kings of the countries that had left the alliance. It was obvious that many things had happened in the 10 years that Xueqi was not around that Xueqi did not know. The first to speak up was the Elven King Anastrian. The Sunwell is very safe. The High Elves are completely capable of defending their home. This time, we have upgraded our defense system. The defense of the Eversong Forest is impregnable. But Xueqi wanted to say something else, but was interrupted again. We, the High Elves, express our regret for the fall of the capital of a kingdom that hoped the elves to cut down trees to build houses for their people. Finally, thank you for your reminder, Lord Marcus. With that, the Elven King actually cut off the magic communication. Before Xueqi could react, Xeon on the other side added, Gilneas is capable of defending his own country. The Grey Main Wall is invincible. With that, Xeon also left. Then, Garen Trollbane glared at Duque with a venomous gaze, and left after throwing down a vicious sentence. The Saladin Wall is not inferior to the Grey Main Wall. Duque suddenly realized that he seemed to have finally gotten close to the original history. He finally understood why the Calamity Army could easily sweep through the entire northern continent after Earthes killed his father. Of course, the Calamity Army's snowballing ability was astonishing. On the other hand, because of the reconstruction and territorial disputes after the war, the strongest Lordaeron had long been in conflict with the surrounding countries. Then, a group of fellows who thought that they were very good at defending with turrets only realized at the moment of destruction that even if an armed goat was armed to the teeth, it was still just a goat. It would never be a match for a wolf. F***CK, this rotten hand is simply a huge pit. At this moment, the aged face of Antonidas suddenly cut into the magic communication. Duque! Hurry and help the Dalajan. Those damned undead monsters are here. They came from the bottom of the lake. After a few words, Antonidas's face disappeared from the magic message. The remaining kings of the alliance all paled. Duque clenched his teeth. There's only one possibility for the magic communication to be interrupted. A stronger element has disturbed the elemental stability of the nearby space. In Duque's mind, he could only think of one word: canopy of necromancy. Only the most powerful undead could forcibly change the elements in the entire sky into the dark element that symbolized death. Could it be Earthes himself? The script of fate seemed to have been seriously deviated. At this moment, Duque still did not know that this was actually his fault. If not for his emergency evacuation plan, Lordaeron would have been completely destroyed this time. It was precisely because the Marcus Merchant Guild ship saved tens of thousands of civilians that Earthes changed his mind and led his army south. Just then, another bad news came. A large number of orcs attacked Golden Hold Castle. Chapter 727. Damn it! Most of those orcs are elites that have been eliminated through cruel battles, one of the generals muttered, revealing the truth. Duque rolled his eyes. If you don't want to die, why do you still want to die? You're so stupid that instead of killing them all, you're helping them train their elites. With Tyrenus's intelligence, even if he doesn't die, it'll be a waste of oxygen. Fortunately, he was stabbed to death by his son. Otherwise, Duque wouldn't want to clean up the mess for Lordaeron. I don't care if you destroy the northern continent, I'll just guard my Stormwind. Anyway, I don't have to go guard the World Tree, right? You want me to take the blame for Lordaeron's sins? Do you think it's easy for me to trick some elite troops? Beside him, a large group of Lordaeron generals saw Duque's eyelids twitching. He looked like he was going to lose his temper at any moment. None of them dared to make a sound. The Dalajan city was under attack. Logically speaking, the 80,000 elites from the Scarlet Cross should be able to help the Dalajan defend against the Scourge. What they were afraid of was that the orcs would arrive as soon as the humans sent reinforcements. Duque took the note filled with information about the orcs and read it 3 times. Then he laughed coldly. You Lordaeron people can do this too. Only send 3,000 people to guard 10,000 orcs? Then all the orcs in the Colosseum, with Breyer as the center, ran out, but didn't report it because of Earthes's victorious return? Even the Warsong clan that hasn't been wiped out is here? Duque's cold laughter was like a whip lashing on the faces of every Lordaeron general. It was an invisible pain that made their faces burn. Most of the generals lowered their heads. This was Tyrenus's fault. As long as they still wore the Lordaeron epaulet, they would have to bear it. At this time, Reynolds' weak voice sounded. There are only 10,000 orcs in Goldenhold Castle. His father, Alessandro, was furious. Bastard, you have no right to speak here. Duque raised his hand and stopped old Mograine. Kid, although I'm only half a generation older than you, when it comes to military matters, you don't have the right to speak. Duque immediately saw the unconvinced expression on Reynolds' face. Duque laughed as well. 10,000 beast men? In fact, it was definitely more than that. The extra ones were secretly sold to the arena by the guards. That's why there are at least 15,000 orcs who hate humans. As soon as Duque finished speaking, the faces of all the generals of the Rotterdam kingdom turned sullen. Corruption. Filthy. And he acted recklessly. It was a great taboo for military strategists to advance without knowing the strength of the opponent. Normally speaking, Even the most well-trained recruits would be easily swapped for 3 orcs. The orcs' title of warrior race was not just for show. If the number of orcs attacking Golden Hold was 30,000, then even Mograine's 80,000 elites wouldn't be enough. At this time, Xueqi raised a second finger. Secondly, the number of orcs in Goldhold right now isn't 30 or 50,000. It's at least 100,000. This news was like a bolt out of the blue. Mograine and the others were all dumbfounded. 100,000? Where did 100,000 come from? How many orc laborers do they have? Abendis asked tentatively. 0. Xueqi sighed. And they're not ordinary second-tier tribes. They're definitely the elite warriors of first-tier clans. What? Old Mograine and the others paled in shock. As people who had experienced the second battle of the Dark Portal and had been fighting the remnants of the Horde for many years, they knew the difference in combat power between Horde elites and second-tier clans. Abendis asked in shock, where did the 100,000 elites come from? Xueqi spread out the intelligence and pointed at the battle flags drawn by the scouts. They recognized all the other flags. The only one that stood out was the Warsong clan's flag. And Xueqi was pointing at another flag that they were extremely unfamiliar with. This is the Frostwolf clan. It used to be the 4th clan in the Horde after the Blackstone, Warsong, and Bloodring clans. Other than having fewer people, their combat power is definitely top-notch. Frostwolf. Everyone was extremely unfamiliar with this name. Xueqi said slowly, it's normal that you don't know. Because in the first year of the Dark Portal, this clan was exiled by the first Great Chief Blackhand and the Warlock King Gul'dan when they first arrived in Azeroth due to political disagreements. They secretly crossed the entire southern continent, crossed the sea from the Gulf of Paladin, passed through Hillsbrad, and lived in seclusion in the depths of the Alterac Mountains. How many elite orc soldiers does the Frostwolf clan have? Mograine asked. No less than 50,000. As for how many there were, Xueqi did not know either. Since the Frostwolf clan had not been besieged in the past 15 years, it was expected that Thrall, who had returned to his ancestry, would receive the support of the Frostwolf clan. 50,000 was already a conservative number. Every general who had experienced the second battle of the Dark Portal frowned deeply. Not to mention saving the Dalajan, they would not even be able to protect themselves. The evil Undying and the orcs, who were filled with hatred towards humans, were enough to massacre the entire continent. Sitting at the head of the table, Queen Kalia looked left and right. Even if she knew nothing about military affairs, she knew that things were not good. Unknowingly, everyone's gazes were cast on Xueqi. They were looking at this mysterious commander who had annihilated millions of orcs more than a decade ago with less than a third of the enemy's forces. If it was someone else sitting in this position, it would certainly be a hopeless situation. But he was different. He was Duke Marcus, a living legend recognized by the 3 races of the Alliance. Since everyone regards me as their commander, I will naturally lead everyone to a path of survival. Xueqi's youthful face was filled with confidence. The powerful aura of someone who could guide the world and play with the enemy in the palm of his hand made the hearts of the 3 women palpitate. Kalia, Elucia, Sari. They all revealed looks of worship. At this very moment, Goldhold Castle. No, don't kill me, no. The last human guard was torn apart. The orcs who had been tortured for who knew how many years, tore off the guard's hands, feet, and head like a doll, turning them into pieces of meat. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. The orc, whose face was covered in blood, laughed maniacally. Long live Thrall. Long live Orgrim. Long live Gromhellscream. The orcs cheered to their heart's content, raising the crude weapons in their hands high to show off their strong muscles. Thrall, holding a blood-stained battle axe, was equally excited. Even he had suffered for far, far too long. The whipping of the humans seemed to still be burning in his back. Chapter 728. At this time, Orgrim, who was in his prime, came over with his famous hammer of destruction. Thrall, let's go if you're done celebrating. So soon? Thrall was a little surprised to see Orgrim looking a little anxious. On the other side, Grom, who was carrying Bloodhowl, also came over. Thrall, you're still too young. You haven't seen the Alliance's terrifying battle potential or those strange weapons of destruction. I suggest you listen to Orgrim when it comes to the big picture. Thrall was a leader-type beastman that only appeared once in 1,000 years. He had unimaginable wisdom and character. That's right. Character determined fate. Experience also shaped character. Different from the original history, Thrall had been found by Orgrim at a young age through the prophecy of the shaman prophet. He had grown up in a different environment and been secretly protected. Even though he was still a gladiator, he didn't receive the abuse that he should have received. At the same time, Blackmore's human lover no longer sympathized with him and gave him warmth. What replaced it was Orgrim's earnest teachings from a young age. Thrall was now raised according to the standard chieftain template. He had a humble personality and listened to Orgrim, who was both his teacher and his father. Thrall lowered his head slightly. Indeed, in the arena, I've heard many legends about the strength of the humans and dwarves. I've never seen them before. Orgrim and Grom, you two have more experience in this than I do. I'll listen to you. At this time, a Beastman scout came over. What? The Scarlet Cross is near us. The three leaders were shocked. The Scarlet Cross, which they had labeled as their #1 target, had actually been stationed in the northwest, less than 30 kilometers away from here, without their knowledge. This was a huge threat. Grom raised his ferocious blood howl. How about it? Do you want to fight? Yes. Thrall and Orgrim said in unison. Then let's go. Regardless of whether the humans were ambushing them or not, this battle had to be fought. Xueqi didn't know that in these 10 years, the Lordaeron people had suppressed the horde very well. They continued to build bunkers and walls to reduce the living space of the beast men. Thrall and Orgrim had long thought of abandoning the Lordaeron continent and seizing a ship to cross the Kalimdor continent. This time, Sal had gathered the elites of the Warsong and Frostwolf clans. In addition to the 20,000 people he had rescued, as well as the 30,000 old, sick and disabled, there were a total of 150,000 beast men. The migration of such a large number of beast men could not be hidden from anyone. Rather than praying that the Scarlet Cross army was blind and could not see the existence of this orc army, it was better to get rid of this terrifying tale. After so many years of battle, these beast men had become extremely elite. From the military system to the command system, Orgrim had modified them based on human methods. 10 minutes after the order was given, an army of more than 80,000 people was mobilized. Loktar. The loud and clear charge that had been absent from the Rotterdam kingdom for many years sounded again. Sar, Grom, Orgrim, and the even more muscular Rexer were leading an army of 80,000 beast men towards the encampment of the Blood Cross. Ha ha ha. I don't know why, but I suddenly remembered that terrible long-distance raid 13 years ago. Orgrim suddenly laughed. Which time? The time when we were near the Long Song forest? Sar remembered every battle that Orgrim had mentioned. Yes. We ran madly for 3 hours, but we were completely empty-handed. Was it that Duke Marcus who led the army? Yes. If possible, I really don't want to meet that guy again. Luckily, the Scarlet Cross army has nothing to do with that guy. Orgrim sighed. He's been dead for more than 10 years, Grom muttered unhappily. He's gone missing. Orgrim emphasized. Even though I don't want to meet him, as long as I don't see his head, I won't be stupid enough to think that my greatest enemy is dead. Sar, do you understand? Never underestimate your enemy until you are sure that he is dead. Understood. Sar nodded. Grom shrugged. You guys are just too careful. The beastmen's speed was very fast. As long as they were the elites of the first-line clans with strong bodies, it would not be a problem for them to run for 50 kilometers at full speed. 30 kilometers would only take about 2 hours. However, when they arrived, the strange scene in front of them left them scratching their heads. The camp was empty. From the looks of it, they had left for about 2 hours, heading towards the mountains in the north. What was even stranger was that there were obvious signs of a battle in the camp. Broken antlers, claw marks on the camp gate. Years of experience fighting in forests and mountains allowed Grom to immediately make a judgment. There was a battle here. It wasn't big, but it must have been a battle. With who? Sar immediately asked. Grom gave a look, and a Warsong Beastman warrior immediately ran over and dug up the huge pile of soil that was obviously newly filled in. The corpses were all burned, so I can't tell. But it looks like it was a human civilian. Human? Civilian? Did the Scarlet Cross suppress a peasant uprising? Sar lacked experience, but Orgrim wasn't. The former chief frowned. Why are there traces of holy light on these corpses? Just as Orgrim was confused, Cheers suddenly erupted in the camp. What's wrong? Weapons. So many weapons. High-grade stuff. A Chiliarch came back to report. Let's go take a look. It was a batch of well-made two-handed hammers and axes that were clearly made by the dwarves. They were made for humans. The handles, heads, and blades of the hammers were made of steel. The beast men loved these weapons so much that they couldn't put them down. Especially the older beast men who had experienced the battle at the Dark Portal. They were lecturing the new generation of beast men on how good these dwarven goods were. What's going on? Orgrim's brows were knitted together. They left in a hurry. These weapons are too heavy. They can't be transported. Grom didn't seem to mind. Perfect for us. You have to know that killing 10 human warriors might not even be enough to get you a good weapon. The standard weapons of the human soldiers are too light. I'm not used to them. Grom was speaking the truth. Human battle formations emphasized teamwork. Other than the nimble spears, weapons that were too long or too heavy would be a hindrance to their teammates. Other than skilled knights or holy knights, very few humans would use heavy weapons on the battlefield. Chapter 729. The two-handed weapons of the humans were only one-handed weapons in the hands of the beast men, but they were still 100 times better than the wooden mallets and stone axes that most beast men used. Is it poisoned? Orgrim asked worriedly. The Chiliarch shook his head. Our people used werewolves to smell it. It's fine. It's just that there seems to be some remnants of human holy light on the weapons. After Orgrim heard this, he was relieved. This should be the reserve of the human silver hand. I just don't know why they were in such a hurry to leave these weapons here. Looking at the 2,000 or so high-quality heavy weapons, Orgrim had an inexplicable doubt in his heart. An army that was likely here to suppress the Beastman uprising had left behind such a large number of weapons. It was practically giving aid to the enemy. Do we not want these weapons? Thrall frowned. Orgrim gritted his teeth. Yes. Why not? If the humans dare to come, we don't mind using their weapons to teach them an unforgettable lesson. Grom said, then are we going to chase after the Scarlet Cross in the north? Fighting in the mountains is more advantageous for us. Thrall said, won't they be too far away from our main force? There are still many children and pregnant women there. Thrall did not know that this sentence had directly pushed the Beastman army into danger. This was the asymmetry of information. Beastmen were not suited to be scouts, so the Beastman's information about Lord Darren was limited to the mountains. In the past, they might have been able to hear some news through the Beastman's slaves who knew the common language. After the uprising, the people of Lord Darren naturally hunted Beastmen without restraint. Many slave owners were afraid of trouble, so they killed all their Beastman slaves and gladiators. Although Thrall's army seemed strong, in a sense, he was in trouble now that he had lost his eyes. Orgrim pondered for a moment. If we catch up to the Scarlet Cross, we might be able to deal a heavy blow to them. But the South Sea City is also very strong. I'm also worried that they will send troops. Since they had reached an agreement, the Beastmen retreated. The strongest Beastmen naturally had the best weapons. What the Beastmen were most worried about did not happen. The main force was still waiting near Gorehold Castle. Let's go! If the Beastmen wanted to cross the Endless Sea, there were not many routes they could choose. After all, the coastline of Lord Darren was very steep, and even the Beastmen could not go down. The best route was from Gorehold Castle to the northeast. Although they had to pass through Eagle Nest Mountain under the wild hammer dwarves' eyes, with the protection of the forest, they might be able to reach an agreement with the jungle trolls again. Unfortunately, the end of this route was a dead end. It was precisely because Orgrim's tribe had used the hinterland sea-watching cliff to enter and exit the Lord Darren continent. Naturally, the human kings would not ignore this flaw. Under the premise that they could not extend their control to the hinterlands, the kings came up with a good idea: to ask the Nagas and Murlocs under Duke's command to guard the sea on the other side of the cliff. With the precedent, the last elite of the tribe of beastmen, Orgs the Beastman. Now tribe. Of land. Of Fifth Fleet. Kurtiras's Fifth Fleet was stationed at the fortress of Tol Barad Island all year round. Even if they broke through the South Shore defense line, it would be suicide. The North Coast and Whispering Coast at the northernmost tip of Lordaeron were not out of the question. The problem was that the beast men had just revolted there, and it was like poking a hornet's nest. To Thrall and the others, it was a dead end. Little did they know that the Scourge army would wipe them out. As a result, the only way out was to the west of the continent, the South Stream Coast and the North Stream Coast. There was a long coastline between the two coasts. This road was like a wooden bridge. This meant that the Beast Men army would have to pass through South Sea, Dalagen, and Gilneas. But Orgrim's analysis: South Sea had no military force, and Gilneas had built the Grey Mane Wall to isolate them. Other than the Dalagen, the other two were unlikely to send troops. However, as the Beast Men army carefully passed through the Hillsbrad Hills from east to west and approached the Dalagen, they suddenly realized that the situation was completely beyond their imagination. What? Humans like monsters? Thrall was stunned. Yes. Those human civilians have gone crazy. Their eyes are even redder than when we drank the demon's blood 10 years ago. One of the Kiliarchs grumbled. My men have already torn them in half, but they can still bite us with their mouths. It feels like they are dead, but how can the dead move? Thrall and Orgrim's faces immediately turned pale. Something was wrong. The two quickly rushed to the front line on their warwolves. The situation in front of them shocked them. Once upon a time, humans used the term Green Sea to describe the Horde's attack. Now, the situation seemed to have completely reversed. The brave beast men formed a relatively tight line, slashing at the humans who were charging at them without any regard for their lives. No, it was obvious that these were not humans. These terrifying creatures that looked like humans had long lost their lives. Thrall saw with his own eyes a man whose chest had been eaten by an unknown creature waving a pitchfork. His teeth were exposed through the torn skin on his face, and an unknown black liquid was flowing between the gaps of his teeth. He madly rushed up and attempted to kill an orc. Even after being cut in half, the monster still crawled up from below. While the orc warrior was busy dealing with the other two monsters, it viciously bit the orc warrior's exposed calf. No, these are not humans. They are some kind of undead. Ancestors above, no wonder the humans did not come looking for trouble with us. They are in huge trouble themselves. Orgrim cried out in shock. Should we retreat? Thrall asked anxiously. Retreat. Retreat immediately. We do not need to foolishly get involved in this disaster. Orgrim clenched his teeth. Just as the Horde was about to retreat, the dark aura of the wind became even more violent. On the shore of Lake Lord Emir, east of the Dalagen city, countless undead walked up from the cold bottom of the lake. In the camp of the Calamity army, accompanied by the cold wind that defied the weather, black flags were raised high and fluttering. As if they sensed something, the giant Arachne and the cursing sex death acolytes raised their heads at the same time. Not only them, but the Death Knight generals and liches with dark aura all looked southeast at the same time. In their eyes, which were pulsing with soul flames, was a holy pillar of light that almost shot up to the sky. Deep in their eye sockets, a trace of doubt appeared. Holy Knights? So many. Chapter 730. The undead were most sensitive to the aura of the living. The holy aura, which was the most effective against the undead, could easily and severely stimulate the remaining senses of the undead. More than 2,000 weapons blessed by the holy light, even if it was only for a short period of time, were no different from lighthouses in the dark. It didn't matter where these paladins came from, but all the commanders of the Calamity army felt that they were being seriously provoked. Human vision was received by the eyes from the outside world, and then transmitted to the brain through the nerves to produce vision. For most of the middle and low-level undead, because their blood had stopped flowing, they had long lost sight. In their senses, they could only see whether the soul fire of the living was strong or not, as well as the vague outline of the living's body. As for what kind of creature the living were, it was not within the scope of their poor intelligence. Be it the holy light or the dark force, they were actually a kind of soul power. Contrary to the dark aura of corruption, it was the holy soul that cultivated the self and cultivated the body. The orcs naturally didn't have paladins, but the noble will of sacrificing themselves for the sake of the race was the same. Just like the day when Anduin and Orgrim dueled and broke Quel'Zarim, it was because the sword judged that Orgrim was a noble person. At this moment, these strong-willed orcs were holding hammers that were blessed with the power of holy light. In the eyes of the undead, They were undoubtedly a large number of paladins. The paladins must die. The undead at the front line almost instinctively rushed to the center of the orcs. A lich floating in the air slowly came to the shore. The cold aura around him formed a thick layer of white frost on the ground. A little purplish-blue soul fire danced in his pitch-black eye sockets. Beside him was a sea of zombies. From time to time, Death Knights held up a black flag and rode their undead warhorses past. From Lake Lordamere, the tide spread endlessly. It was the undead army that covered the entire land from the shore. The gloomy sky was filled with fluttering snowflakes. The distant view of the battlefield was reflected in the depths of the emotionless, cold eyes. He raised his withered chin and stretched out a pale and slender finger. He held the skeleton staff in his hand and pointed it in the direction of the holy light. There was no need for a password. All the living were the enemies of the Calamity army. On both sides, the Death Knights and low-level undead acolytes pressed their bony palms on their chests. The purplish-blue soul fire that was stimulated by the power of the devil burned even more fiercely. Stimulated by the power of the devil, the purplish-blue soul fire burned even more fiercely. Like falling dominoes, the commanders of the Scourge troop lowered their heads one after another. When they raised their heads again, their eyes were filled with pale white flames. The roar from the soul level drove away the low undead with insufficient wisdom below. In the name of the Burning Legion, kill Xueqi. Along with the roar of the souls, the huge black tide of death that had accumulated on the shores of Laudermill Lake began to pour towards the orc army that was advancing towards the south. On the north bank of Dalaran, the frontline commander Arthas, who stood at the highest point of the Scourge army with Frostmourne in hand, looked up and said, "What the hell is Ras Frostwhisper doing?" "I want him to attack the Dalajan from the east." Oasis Frostwhisper. Due to a slight twist in history, Sir Oasis, who had already died and sunk to the bottom of Caer Darrow Lake, was fished out of the lake by Kel Thuzad, who was searching for dark allies. In one fell swoop, he became Kel Thuzad's most outstanding student and one of the core members of the Cursing Sect. Naturally, it would be difficult for Earthies alone to control an army of undead that numbered in tens of thousands. When he fell, Kel Thuzad, who was killed by him last year, was naturally in the same camp as him, and Kel Thuzad's men were promoted to frontline commanders. Ras Frostwhisper wasn't bad, but that was the extent of it. Ras Frostwhisper was equivalent to a Radiant Moon Mage, but when faced with the Dalajan mages, Earthies clearly felt that Ras Frostwhisper was useless. This self-proclaimed king of Lordaeron's Death Knight began to miss Kel Thuzad, an assistant with sufficient intelligence and powerful magic. Earthies looked at Dark Dean Jadine beside him, then looked at the dozens of mage towers outside the Dalajan city that were constantly flashing with magical light. He frowned and said, "Since Ras Frostwhisper thinks that the beastmen over there are a threat, let him be. How long will it take before the Dalajan's magical energy is exhausted?" Jadine estimated and said, 3 days, and at least 300,000 cannon fodder will be used. Earthies sneered in contempt and said, "Cannon fodder? There are human settlements everywhere in the Hillsbrad Hills. There's as much cannon fodder as you want. If you don't have them, go find them." Those beast men seem to be good cannon fodder. With their strong bones, even if they become skeleton soldiers, they will be stronger than ordinary skeleton soldiers. Understood. Dean Jadine bowed deeply and retreated. A few minutes later, more undead rushed towards the beast men. Now, not only had the beastmen's front army fallen, even the middle army was beginning to be surrounded. Unless Sar and Orgrim were willing to abandon the women and children, they could only fight to the death. Oh my ancestors! Where did these bones come from? Sar was very depressed. He had already changed his hammer for the 3rd time. Not only did he lack a suitable weapon, but he had also not practiced the path of the shaman at this point in time. He was just a super soldier. Orgrim was also in a difficult situation. He had no choice but to wave the hammer of destruction and chase the undead knights that were running all over the mountains on their skeletal warhorses. Other than him and a few chieftains, the ordinary beastmen had no way to resist the undead knights. Perhaps the holy light in their hands would be more effective, but they were not real paladins. Before the holy light could hit the undead knights, they first had to withstand the dark magic of the undead knights. The only consolation was that these undead knights were not too strong. After all, the first batch of undead knights that Gul'dan created were all sorcerers, and they had one set of dark magic after another. Most of these undead knights were pure knights, and they were more inclined towards physical attacks. In the southern foothills of the Alterac Mountains to the east of the Dalajan city, a few sneaky figures appeared. Mograine could not help but sigh when he saw the fierce battle below through his binoculars. Duque, you still have a way. Chapter 731. One could imagine what would happen if the Scarlet Cross rushed in to rescue the Dalajan. That's right, the Beastman army would end up like the Scarlet Cross. Duque smiled mysteriously. If we went straight to the Dalajan, we would have to face nearly 1,000,000 Scourge soldiers and 100,000 Beast men. But now, with the Beast men helping us take the lead, we can relax a lot. More than 2,000 hammers blessed with King's blessing and Power's blessing in exchange for 100,000 elite Beast men as our reinforcements. Not a bad deal, is it? Duque had a calm expression. Duke was able to easily make two powerful enemies kill each other. His ability to strategize was something that even Mograine, the former commander of the Alliance, had to admit that he couldn't compare to, let alone the other generals. Duque didn't notice a beautiful female general standing behind Abendis. She looked somewhat similar to Abendis, and she was looking at him with some kind of indescribable fanaticism. Abendis asked, "When do we enter?" Duque rested his chin on his hand. "Well, we attack when Arthas goes to cause trouble for Orgrim. Remember, we can't turn back. We have to kill our way through the enemy lines and the center of the Dalajan army. After joining up with the Dalajan mages, we can counterattack Arthas. Arthas has the magic tool Frostmourne. To be honest, Arthas should be a demigod now. Our chances of winning are not high." Abendis asked tentatively, "What about the Dragon Sleep Temple?" I've asked. "The Burning Legion has sent many powerful demons to attack the spatial barrier of Azeroth. Maligos and Nozdormu can't come, and the Emerald Dream has been unstable recently. Isera can't leave either. In addition, Alexstrasza was still trapped in the void of Karazhan. The current Dragon Sleep Shrine was a classic example of a group of dragons without a leader. In the past, Duque had wondered why the Dragon Sleep Temple was in Noscent and why the Scourge Army, that group of trash, could dominate all of Noscent and sweep through all life forms. Only by immersing himself in this period of history did Duque truly understand the depth of the Burning Legion's foundation. It was obvious that a large group of Khazar-level demon generals and dreadlords were restraining the giant dragon army from the outside, preventing the giant dragons from dealing with the mortal world's Scourge army. In the Dragonbone Wasteland, the guardians of the Dragonbone Shrine could only protect themselves. Duque smirked. "We're going to challenge demigods soon. Are you afraid?" If this demigod's name wasn't Arthas, I would have peed my pants. Abendis seemed to be smiling bitterly. Mograine gritted his teeth. "Loyalty. I will not retreat until I die." Duque sighed. If it were him, he would definitely leave after saving them. There were so many mages in the Dalajan. It would be terrible if they all died here. However, war was fought by humans, and humans had hearts. Even with Kalia's help, Mograine and Abendis would not be satisfied if they did not try to avenge Tarina's and just left like that. At the moment when Wuther could not be contacted, Duke did not have a single person who was powerful enough to break the charts. Challenging Arthas with just Mograine, Abendis, and Antonidas would be courting death. If Orgrim, Lord Howlgrom, and Rexer were included, it would be a different story. In the original history, Grom had a glorious record of killing a demon lord. First, they forced the beast men to fight Arthas. Then, Duque would be able to bring an insufficient number of people and act as real reinforcements in an unkind way. Of course, Duque did not want Mograine and Abendis to die here. We don't know how powerful the peerless Frostmourne is. If things go south, we will quickly retreat in the opposite direction of the Beastman's retreat. In principle, our goal is to return to the coast of the South Sea City. As long as we reach the South Sea defense line, we will be safe with the help of the cannons. Mograine and Abendis nodded at the same time. Then they looked at Prince Arthas in the north of the Dalajan, gritted their teeth, and left. No one knew how many undead the Scourge army had created. In the depths of Lake Lordamir, undead kept coming out of the lake. Even with the elites of the Scarlet Cross, it was a very risky thing to attack such a terrifying undead army. One mistake and the Scarlet Cross would become the Undead Crusade. None of the Lordaeron soldiers hesitated, because in front of them was the traitor who had killed the king they swore to serve for the rest of their lives, Arthas. The people of Lordaeron went down to prepare. "Ilucia, you should go back with Kalia. This will be the cruelest war zone from now on. Kalia had long been teleported to Stormwind City. Even though Kalia already had the strength of a regional bishop, her identity as the Queen of Lordaeron had determined that no one would be willing to risk her life at the front lines. After Xueqi finished speaking, Elucia did not move. Xueqi, how long are you going to hide it from me? Are you going to face an evil demigod with your terrible magic circuits? Xueqi was shocked, and then smiled bitterly. Did you see through me? Humph. Where's your Magus hand? 10 years ago, you had the power to wipe out half an army by yourself. Don't think I didn't see you when you made your move at Terran Mill. That kind of proper spellcasting. How is it any different from an ordinary Radiant Moon Mage? No, the current you, apart from your superb skills, might not even be able to defeat me. Elucia was right. Xueqi was not in a good state. Since his return, Xueqi had been secretly trying to repair his magic circuits. Unfortunately, the ultra-long-distance irregular teleportation not only put a huge burden on the system elf, but also caused Xueqi's magic circuits to be in a state of constant acceleration and overload because of the many spatial cracks he encountered during the teleportation. His magic circuits were not simply damaged. Many of them were directly burnt and melted. They were no longer orderly, and were almost twisted into a ball. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were crippled. Xueqi turned his head slightly, and looked at the intense battlefield in the distance. Elucia, I must go. A tragedy was about to happen. If not to make up for the various regrets in his heart, what was the point of him transmigrating to Azeroth? The current Xueqi was no longer the Xueqi of 15 years ago, who was good as long as he was not a ghoul. Chapter 732. The more she pretended not to care. Xueqi needed immediate combat power, and Elucia could provide it. If Elucia's magic circuit was transplanted to Xueqi, Xueqi could at least quickly return to the strength of a peak Radiant Moon Mage. The more Xueqi cared, the more he cared. Looking at the burning love in Elucia's pure eyes, Xueqi suddenly understood why. If just sacrificing a small part of my soul in exchange for my lover's life, it's worth it. Besides, doing this will give me the confidence to stand shoulder to shoulder with Sister Aurelia and Sister Sasha. Her alluring red lips lightly touched Xueqi's tiger's lips. Elucia gazed at Xueqi. Or do you hate having my soul merge with yours? Xueqi could not imagine what kind of pain it was beyond the physical. It was obvious that it would be more terrifying and painful than having one's hands and feet torn off from a human body. No, this was not a simple feeling. It was a feeling of disappointment. 3 years together. Many things could happen. Thirdly, both parties involved in the transplant had to be willing. Whether it was magic or holy light, they were all strange energies that originated from the soul. The magic circuit was a special magic production and circulation channel that was shaped by one's own soul. As long as the other soul resisted, even if it was subconsciously, then the transplant would inevitably fail. Time did not diminish Elucia's love for Xueqi. Instead, it was like a fine wine stored in a cellar, becoming more fragrant the more it was brewed. Secondly, the magic circuit of both parties must be of the same origin. For example, those who played with Phoenix Flame, and directly transplanted it into Ice Crown, without any transformation would be courting death. 3. But he did not expect that this woman, who was not talented in magic and was destined to be unable to step into the realm of heroes to fight alongside him, would be willing to sacrifice herself for him to this extent. Unknowingly, tears were already flowing down Xueqi's cheeks. Then, the forest began to echo with Elucia's unsuppressible moans of pain. How many women would be willing to wait for a lover who had been missing for 10 years, and was probably long dead? In the face of Xueqi's determined look, Elucia gently shook her head. Bit by bit, she sucked on those 2 luscious red lips, sucking in the fragrance that came from her lover. Use my magic circuit. Elucia's smile was so gentle and moving, as if she was saying something that had nothing to do with her. 10 years, the most crucial 10 years for a young girl to become a true lady. With the accumulation of generations, the quality and quantity of magic circuits would be astonishing. Xueqi had thought that his threat would be effective, and he would see panic on her beautiful face, which was full of mature charm. That way, he would be able to get her to give up on this crazy idea. However, he couldn't bear to watch his friend and hero die. Why was it that most magicians were passed down through aristocratic families, and the first generation of magicians were rarely very powerful? It was no longer a simple friendship or emotional bond. Elucia, You're crazy. Do you know how painful a transplant is? The magic circuit is also a part of your soul. Even if my circuit is burned, it's only that part of the circulation is blocked. But if your circuit is transplanted, it's like forcibly tearing a part of your soul out. Xueqi shouted agitatedly, grabbing Alicia's arms hard and shaking the woman who had followed him wholeheartedly for more than 10 years. But, Xueqi shuddered, his face full of horror. He directly pulled Alicia into his arms, one hand gently holding the soft shoulder of the noble lady, and the fingers of the other hand directly touching the intellectual face. 10 years apart. Then, any more words would be superfluous. What else could Xueqi say? It seemed a little naughty, but in fact, Xueqi was re-examining Alicia. He wanted to deeply remember every line on this beautiful face, engrave it in his retina, engrave it in his heart, and brand it in the depths of his soul. Xueqi kissed her hard. Too. Before he came back, Alicia did not abandon his fief, and even conscientiously built his fief into the most prosperous area in the southern continent. For this, Xueqi was already very grateful. Nearly 5 years of planning and hard work, 10 years of wandering in the void. The life on Earth seemed to have become very far away. Only with the help of the system could he easily recall the bits and pieces of Earth. Unknowingly in Xueqi's heart, there was a kind of awareness that he was already breathing with Azeroth, sharing the same fate. Xueqi was disappointed. Alicia had the above 3 points. It sounded very good, didn't it? It was precisely because before he transmigrated, whether it was from the examples of people around him, or the influence of WeChat and Weibo, that Xueqi had seen too many love affairs that could not stand the test of time. He dared not have the greatest hope. He could hide in Karazhan, where he could live a shameless life with the Windrunner sisters every day. He could decorate the space that belonged to him at will. He could immerse himself in the world of magic like a real mage. And with Alexstrasza's protection, he did not even have to worry about the cats and dogs of the Burning Legion coming to find him. Use her magic circuit? First, both parties of the transplant had to be alive. Once they died, the activity of the magic circuit would quickly dissipate. Xueqi, I'm not stopping you from going. My great hero. That soft voice naturally made people think of a young wife staying at home quietly waiting for her husband to return. Gently tilting her head, Alicia emphasized, I'm just stopping you from going to die in this state. What else could Xueqi say? However, Alicia used her weak body to bear all of this. 1. Looking at Alicia's face that pretended not to care for his peace of mind, feeling the trembling from her delicate body, Xueqi's heart had long been drowned in tears. However, there were many prerequisites for this. That's right, the magic circuit could actually be transferred and transplanted. What? 10. That was because the children of mage families could inherit the magic circuit of their parents and even their ancestors. Without any flirting or ambiguity, Xueqi's right index finger slowly moved down the delicate lines of Alicia's face, gently pressing down. After slightly loosening his index finger, the delicate skin and bright red lips trembled and bounced back under the effect of inertia. After an unknown amount of time, the 4-faced lips left, panting. Chapter 733. When Mograine was worried that something had happened to Xueqi and ran back with his guards to look for him, all he saw was a lone figure with tear stains on his face. Where's Miss Barov? I sent her back to Stormwind City. It was only right to send the women and non-combatants away before the battle started. But what was with the tear stains on Xueqi's face? What was up with the sudden surge in his aura and the surging elements in his body? Mograine had not seen Xueqi for more than a decade. Even during the battle where Xueqi and all of Karazhan had disappeared, Xueqi and Mograine had fought on different battlefields, one in the north and one in the south. Mograine's impression of Xueqi was that he had unparalleled intelligence and courage, but was not strong himself. He had never been able to equate Xueqi with the strong. But now it was different. Even a paladin like him, who was not familiar with the occult, could feel Xueqi's power. Xueqi had become a Breaking Dawn wizard? No. Compared to Antonida's, he was still a little lacking. They both had that kind of surging elemental aura, but there seemed to be a difference in quality. Even so, it was still very terrifying. Xueqi was not even 30 years old yet, right? Holy light above, he still looked like he was 18 years old. Mograine's shock was only limited to this. If he had known that Xueqi was already immortal, perhaps he would have been truly envious and jealous. Quickly collecting his thoughts, They looked down the mountain. The battle between the Orc army and the Scourge army had reached its climax. The elite Orc warriors from Warsong and Frostwolf formed a 5-kilometer-long battle line, holding off the undead tide that was surging from the north to the south. Under the maintenance of this battle line, further south was the migrating Orc army. Countless Orc women and children carried them on their shoulders and arms, leading the small Orcs as they ran. It would be impossible for a human to pass through the Hillsbrad Plains in such a short time under the attack of the undead creatures. Humans had to bring their families and belongings with them. It was destined that human civilians could rarely travel more than 50 kilometers a day. The Orcs were different. The Orcs used the sky as their blanket and the earth as their bed. They were used to a life of hunting, so they were not afraid of starving to death even if they were empty-handed. Moreover, many beast men had just been released from prison, so none of them had any assets. As a result, the speed at which the Orc women and children marched was even faster than a fully armed human army. Attack! You bunch of brainless people! Ras Frost Whisper roared. The sole punishment of a high undead made a large number of intermediate undead tremble. They roared and used the shouts from their souls to drive away the zombies, ghouls, and other low-level undead. They were like endless waves that crashed into the Orc battle formation. This time, Ras Frost Whisper wasn't the only one who was startled. Even Arthes was startled. Orcs! Those filthy creatures! Arthes's fall was on the spiritual level, but it did not mean that he had been brainwashed. On the contrary, he knew very well how powerful the Orcs were. When he was growing up, Uther had made him fight against Orc slaves in order to train him. Similarly, before he had fallen, he had also participated in the suppression of the Orc uprising. Most importantly, he had personally experienced the battle where Lordaeron's city had almost fallen, and felt the fear that made him feel ashamed and uneasy even to this day. Even though he no longer thought that he had human emotions, the rage of revenge still drove him to make a decision. Arthes waved his hand. The huge black flag began to move. Beside him were hundreds of Death Knights riding skeletal warhorses. They had all fought alongside Arthes in their lives, from Andoril in Lordaeron all the way to the bone-chilling Northrend. It was only when Arthes pulled out Frostmourne and fell that Arthes took their lives and turned them into elite Death Knights. As soon as they started their charge, the Orcs immediately sensed them. Thrall shouted, "Orgrim, do you have any good ideas? Looks like a very powerful guy is coming." Orgrim glanced at the Orc women and children behind him, who still had a third of them, and suddenly turned back. "Thrall, as the future star who will shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the Orcs, you answer me as a great chieftain in waiting. Will you abandon your people because of the danger?" "No, never." Thrall's answer was sonorous and powerful. Nearby, Grom, Rexer, and the tens of thousands of Orcs who were fighting with passion all smiled at the same time. "Loktar Ogre, if we don't win, we will rather die." How many years had it been? Who knew how many years it had been since the Orcs had shouted such a domineering slogan with tens of thousands of people as a unit? At this moment, the old Orcs who had experienced the second battle at the Dark Portal felt like crying. It was another series of extremely fierce slashes, and the zombies and ghouls that had rushed to the front of the Orc formation fell like wheat being cut down, one by one. At this moment, Arthas's Death Knights charged over. The skeletal warhorses looked so thin that only bones were left, but because they emitted an even denser aura of death, the low-tier undead in their path all retreated. The skeletal warhorses were like icebreakers, easily killing their way to the front of the Orc army in just a few minutes. This was a clash without any fancy moves. Would the giant wave break the dam? Or would the dam break the giant wave? The strongest sound since the start of the battle told the world an answer. It was a draw. The Orcs were not good at defense. Even though it looked like the Orcs were on the defensive side, that was just an illusion. The Orcs completely destroyed their enemies to maintain this so-called line of defense. When the Death Knight arrived, the Death Knight would either instantly kill the Orc with dark magic, or the Orc would use its warhammer that was emitting a faint holy radiance to smash the Death Knight and the skeleton warhorse into dust. The instant confrontation was like a tit against a tat. This was a terrifying way of fighting that seemed more like mutual destruction, and it made the leaders of both sides feel a little pained. Kill. Loktar. In the blink of an eye, it was a chaotic battle. Just as the Death Knights charged into the battle line, even the Doomsday Army didn't notice that at the southernmost end of the Alterac Mountains, not far away, an army quietly entered. At first, No one noticed this army because outside the army, there was a cold fog that covered a few square kilometers. It felt no different from the Doomsday Army's cold canopy of undead. Chapter 734. By the time the commander of the Calamity Army realized what was going on, they were already less than 2 kilometers away from the Dalajan troops. The ground rumbled. Even the stones on the ground bounced a few centimeters into the air. It was impossible to hide from anyone. It wasn't like there weren't any huge monsters in the Scourge. The cave demons that had been transformed from spider demons were one of them, but they were definitely not as shocked as they were now. No, this is not our army. Dean Jaden, who was commanding the army from the rear, suddenly realized what was going on. At this moment, none of the liches had realized what was going on. The mist suddenly dispersed. An army in crimson armor, like a huge red dragon that had just woken up, showed its claws and teeth to the Calamity troop. For the Holy Light. The 500 paladins of the Silver Hand led the charge. For the peace of the dead, the Knights of Rotterdam waved their weapons that had been blessed with holy light and followed closely behind. Even the Dalajan infantry soldiers who were fighting on the Dalajan city wall 5 kilometers away could clearly hear their battle cry. The people of Dalaran were pleasantly surprised by this army that suddenly appeared behind the Calamity Army as if it was a magic trick. Reinforcements? Thank the heavens! The people of Rotterdam are here. Long live the Alliance. Without reinforcements, they would definitely lose. This was an unchanging truth since the beginning of time. Even magic communication had been cut off. Not to mention the cavalry, even the griffins could not fly out. Looking at the terrifying army of the dead that was like an endless ocean, any ordinary person would quickly lose their courage. If not for the hundreds of mage towers behind them that were constantly using extraordinary power to clean up the monsters, the Dalajan infantry at the front line would have long collapsed. Without any warning, they suddenly welcomed the Scarlet Cross, one of the few powerful reinforcements on the entire continent. The morale of the Dalajan was instantly boosted. On the highest mage tower, Antonidas, who was calculating his mana consumption and using it as rhythmically as possible, was also pleasantly surprised to see this scene. What happened next made Antonidas even happier. Under the command of the Dark Dean, the gargoyles that were hovering in the sky and swooping down from time to harvest the heads of the humans on the city wall began to attack the charging cavalry. Most of the low-level undead creatures were slow. It was impossible for the low-intelligence ghouls, zombies, and skeleton soldiers to instantly turn around and counterattack. Using the gargoyles' countercharge and the cavern demons' long-range attacks to defeat the human cavalry's charge as much as possible was the best solution that Dean Gatton could come up with. Even a veteran general like Mograine could not help but feel his scalp go numb when he saw the gargoyles whizzing through the sky. Knights and cavalry did not have any anti-air capabilities. Even a holy knight's long-range attacks were limited, and the distance was extremely short. Paladins could fight, tank, and heal, but they didn't have any ranged attacks. This was a natural shortcoming that couldn't be fixed. The Rotterdam Kingdom never lacked warriors who would charge head-on into the enemy's air force, but Mograine did not want his men to waste their lives in the hands of the enemy's air force. If the army advanced slowly, they could have the cover of the archers and mages, but they would also lose the chance to launch a surprise attack. It was not that Mograine had never thought of leading the mages to charge on horseback. Unfortunately, most mages did not have the ability to cast spells while moving. Low-level mages had to stop and sense the surrounding elements, and then form a resonance and connection with the elemental realm before slowly chanting spells. By the time they made their move, it would be too late. Fortunately, he had Xueqi on his side. There was no one in the Alliance who had the 2 metamagic abilities, high-speed moving casting, and super multicast, at the same time. It was generally accepted that in the field of multicast, even the 2 Breaking Dawn archmages, Antonidas and Anastrian, had to concede defeat to Xueqi. He just did not know if Xueqi's skills had become rusty after 10 years. Xueqi, it's all up to you. Mograine looked at Xueqi who was charging with him, his eyes filled with undisguised pleading. Leave it to me. The 3 short words were powerful and sonorous. For some reason, the baleful Xueqi today gave Mograine and Abendis an inexplicable sense of trust and security compared to the usual Xueqi, who always wore a gentle smile. The wind had started blowing. It was a strong wind that was blowing from east to west, the exact opposite of the season. He had thought that the heavens were helping him, but 2 seconds later, Mograine was shocked to find that the source of the wind was actually Xueqi who was beside him. Not only was there wind, but there was also fire. The Lordaeron horse Xueqi was riding seemed to panic when it saw the fire beneath its feet, but the mysterious light from Xueqi's hand quickly calmed the horse, causing it to immediately enter a state of forgetfulness and gallop away. So fast. That was a speed that far surpassed that of a normal arrow. Was that the mage's blazing haste? How could it be so fast? Mograine did not know much about magic. He only knew that there was this meta-magic ability. Of course, he did not know that after the baptism of the storm altar, Xueqi also had the power of wind and thunder. Under the double acceleration, Xueqi looked like a stream of light to outsiders. At that moment, one man and one horse, empty-handed, Xueqi charged into the formation of the scourge with a crimson magic light. In front of him, hundreds of ghouls with ruined faces and ferocious fangs surged. On the two wings were venomous spiders thrown by the cave demons, revealing their horrifying mouthparts in midair. In the sky were gargoyles that could easily tear a knight and his horse into pieces when they dove down with their wings tucked between their legs. 3 layers of attacks came at the same time. No matter how brave and courageous the holy knights were, they were all shocked by this scene. In the next moment, they couldn't believe their eyes. Fire. It was fiercer than prairie fire. Fiercer than the fire that burned the sky. The 1024 hands of magic that suddenly appeared in the void raised 1024 fireballs the size of water tanks. Xueqi raised his head. Emotionless. A string of familiar yet strange green words poured down from Xueqi's retina. Yes, with the magic circuit transplanted, Xueqi straightened out his magic circuit. This was like dredging a river with silt. Of course, using a boat to dig away the silt was a solution, but using a larger amount of water to wash away the silt could also be done, but it was more violent and faster. Previously, when his rank temporarily fell, Xueqi lacked the magic power to solve the problem. Now that he had an external aid that was not much inferior to his, everything would be easily solved. Elucia, your gift, your love I, Xueqi, have received. Chapter 735. With an ear-piercing whistle, the fireballs around Xueqi scattered in all directions. It was a terrifying scene, as though a meteor shower had fallen to the ground. Everywhere the fireballs went, there were thunderous explosions. Thunderous explosions resounded, sparks flew in all directions, rocks exploded, and bones and flesh flew everywhere. The scene at the scorching canyon 13 years ago seemed to replay itself in Mograine's eyes. Back then, it was only possible for an entire dwarven tank legion to create such a scene. But now, Xueqi had done it all by himself. Perhaps his destructive power was still lacking, but his momentum was definitely not inferior to that of the past. Far away in the south, Orgrim, who had suddenly heard the loud noise from the north, suddenly raised his head. Such a horrified sound naturally made him think of the same thing. The same shocking momentum. The same perfect timing to strike. Even though his vision was limited on the horizon and he had no time to pay attention to anything else in the fierce battle, Orgrim could not help but mutter a name that had given him nightmares for more than 10 years. Duke Marcus. It was as though a lit fuse had cut into the massive group of undead. With this fuse as the center, all the undead parted to the sides. They were forced to move aside in the form of flesh and bones flying everywhere. Broken human legs, broken spider legs, shattered stone fragments of the gargoyles. That kind of visual impact caused everyone who saw this scene to be shaken to the core. Xueqi's speed was too fast. A few seconds after he and his horse swept past, the huge fireballs that flew out exploded in the distance. It looked as though the ground had been forcefully plowed open by a huge plow, and the soil fell in all directions. As soon as Xueqi passed, there was a series of explosions behind him, and the undead formation was in disarray. Charging head-on with the enemy's spear formation was the worst strategy. Even if the enemy's back was facing them, it was not advantageous for them to charge if they stood too closely together. After all, there were many huge creatures among the undead, such as the cavern demons that were almost 2 men tall. If they were to collide with them head-on, it would definitely result in the deaths of both men and horses. Only with the right amount of sparseness was the best place for the cavalry to display their might. Seeing the gaps in the Doomsday Army's defense line, Mograine and Abendis shouted at the same time. Good. Xueqi had never been a cavalry commander for even a day, but he had long understood the true meaning of military formations after years of leading troops. If the Scarlet Cross could not grasp such a perfect opening, then they would be letting down their reputation as elites. The Dark Dean Gatling, the man who had taken over the Bara family's fortress and turned Caer Darrow into the base of the cursed god's cult, the man who turned Scholomance into a true academy, screamed in pain. No! In the absence of Kel Thuzad, he and Ras Frostwhisper were competitors. Lys represented the Scourge, but he was more inclined towards Kel Thuzad's direct line of descent. Just now, when Rhys couldn't take down the beast men, he was happy to watch the show, but now it was his turn to suffer. He didn't dare to imagine what would happen if he were to squander the army right after Arthas, the King of Death, handed it over to him. How would Arthas deal with him later? In the heart of Lich King Nazul, Arthas's position was much higher than that of Kel Thuzad, the dark wizard with a damaged soul. What's more, Kel Thuzad had been killed by Arthas and hadn't been resurrected yet. Gatling could see that Xueqi was the key to the entire human army. As long as he killed Xueqi, he was 70% sure that he could take a breather and then swallow this human army. He couldn't watch any longer, so he made a decisive move. 7 continuous, incomparably gorgeous flashes allowed him to cross over a distance of more than a kilometer, and in an instant, he reached Xueqi's side. Not good. The layman watched the show, while the expert saw the artistry. Xueqi's sea of fireballs looked incomparably gorgeous, and he could almost single-handedly deal with half of the Scourge army. In the eyes of experts, Xueqi was actually a scumbag with a little bit of cleverness. Why? Because Xueqi only used low-level flame blast. Even Antonidas, who was watching this scene through the magician's eye, was fooled by Xueqi's seemingly gorgeous but actually weak methods. The veteran Breaking Dawn wizard subconsciously thought that Xueqi had been seriously injured while rushing back from the void. In fact, this was indeed the case. However, no one would have thought that Xueqi had used Elusia's magic circuit to resurrect with full energy. At this moment, Xueqi looked like he had the power of a peak morning star. The name of the best actor Xueqi was not just for show. Die! Gatling flashed over, and the first thing he did was sacrifice. He didn't even notice the trace of mockery at the corner of Xueqi's mouth. Mirror image of truth. Activated. The only thing Gatling's demonic flames burned was the poor horse. In the next moment, the light of flash lit up behind Gatling. Not good. I've been tricked. The elemental undulations that suddenly erupted from Xueqi didn't seem like that of a weak morning star wizard. This was clearly a radiant moon who was at the same level as Gatling. And not just any ordinary radiant moon, but one that was about to step into Breaking Dawn, a half-step Breaking Dawn wizard. Gatling's intestines turned green with regret. Why had he courted death? He'd actually been so hot-headed as to personally deal with someone else's trump card. Those who could charge alone were either idiots who only had courage left in their minds, or people with shocking strength. Evidently, the other party was the latter. Without any hesitation, Gatling flashed as well. Who knew that a scene that scared Gatling out of his wits would appear? A radiant moon wizard could flash more than 100 meters away. Gatling could jump more than 200 meters with his full strength. With a radius of 200 meters, this was an extremely large range. He never expected that at the spot he'd set up, the same radiance of flash would light up almost at the same time. That's right. Xueqi's vengeful spirit had caught up. This is impossible. Gatling cried out in alarm. It was impossible for other mages to do so. Sensing such minute magical undulations from a warlock who was a wizard and used the power of darkness in the canopy of necromancy that was filled with the aura of death? This is impossible. As if to confirm his thoughts, Gatling once again activated Flash, and then let out another cry of despair. The combination of Xueqi and the system elf made the impossible possible. In Xueqi's retina, coupled with the holographic image in his mind that had been scanned and marked by the system, Xueqi could clearly see every magical undulation that belonged to Dean Gatling in the surrounding space. This final boss of Scholomance, one of Kel Thuzad's left and right arms, was just a dancing clown in the palm of Xueqi's eyes. Die! Bigby threw out a series of demonic punches. This cursing sect boss, who had yet to completely abandon his human body, was actually beaten to death by Xueqi amidst thousands of troops in front of countless beings. Chapter 736. Who asked you to play with curses and sneak attacks? Suddenly, with a Bigby's flying slap, Ganding's chest collapsed. Who asked you to be a dog of the dead instead of a living person? With another, Bigby's Vajra fist, Ganding's face was crooked. Who asked you to occupy my woman's home and play disco dance on her grave? With another, Bigby's shattering palm, Ganding's tortoise head was directly smashed into his chest. As the saying went, only Pharaoh understood Pharaoh the best. The sorcerer who had turned into a sorcerer had as many control skills as the stars in the sky. Flash, icicle, ring of ice, sheep transformation, fear. However, when Xueqi attacked so quickly that Ganding couldn't use any control skills, the fastest way to break his mage shield was not elemental attacks, but the most violent physical damage. The most ruthless part of the Big B's Pig Hand series, oh no, the Magic Fist series, was that it turned elemental damage into physical damage. This directly killed Ganding, who had set his mage shield to anti-elemental damage early on. If Ganding knew that the person in front of him was Xueqi, the most active hero of the Alliance in the Battle of the Dark Portal more than 10 years ago, he would never have rashly come to kill him. However, Xueqi had been missing for 10 years. How many people would pay attention to a former hero who had been missing for 10 years and had been determined to be a dead man in battle? Even Kel Thuzad had only casually mentioned Xueqi's name. This time, Ganding's death was not unjust. Ah! Accompanied by Ganding's vague scream, the chain of command of the Northern and Eastern Legion of the Scourge army surrounding the Dalajan broke. No matter what era, in any form of army, killing a commander was a very taboo thing. The Scourge army was terrifying, and the low-level undead were not afraid of death, but they also lacked wisdom and needed a commander. As the middle-level commander of the Scourge army, the Lich and the Death Knight did not appear out of thin air. It was not like finding a farmer and killing him could turn him into a Lich. It wasn't like finding a soldier and using dark magic to transform him into a Death Knight. The strength of an Undying was directly proportional to the strength of his soul when he was alive. The current Scourge army was not the same as the one that had wiped out the Dalajan and Kuel Salas. At that time, the Scourge army was truly terrifying. There were countless Liches and Death Knights that turned into mages. Due to the fact that they did not completely devour the Rotterdam city, many of the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom took the opportunity to escape by boat. Other than the Arachne army, Arthas' Scourge army was lacking in many parts. Even the commander could only be transferred from Kel Thuzad's cursing sect. Dark Dean Gardine was killed by Xueqi, and there was suddenly a lack of a big shot who could really unify the opinions of the Liches. The Doomsday army was obviously in chaos. They had lost Gadin and could not contact Arthas. At this moment, Arthas was surrounded by a few Horde heroes. Some led the Undying under their command to continue attacking, some wanted to change the main direction of the army and counterattack the Scarlet Cross army, and some chose to retreat into Lake Lord Emir after not receiving any new orders. One could imagine the chaos of the Scourge army. From the dead Dark Dean Gardine, Xueqi took the Dean's staff, which was known as one of the 7 weapons of the past. It was a staff with a goat-horned demon skull at the top, and a few layers of bone spikes at the top and tail of the staff. It was quite an evil-looking staff. The biggest feature of this staff was enlightenment. After the effect was activated, it could increase the intelligence of all allies within the range of the halo. Its significance was that it could allow magic apprentices to safely use the temporarily increased intelligence to experience higher-level magic when their own intelligence was not up to the standard. If Xueqi wanted to recruit disciples in the future, the Dean's staff was indeed a good thing. Of course, the skull was too much of an eyesore. Well, it was just like when I played games with Xueqi, a certain bastard warrior named Recruit would go around using the Dean's staff to increase the intelligence of other mages. Xueqi usually did not have a use for this staff. That little bit of intelligence was nothing to Xueqi. After throwing the Dean's staff into the storage pouch given to him by Elusia, Xueqi stood with his hands behind his back. In less than a minute, the Scarlet Cross army's cavalry had already rushed past him. Like the legendary miracle of a sword splitting the sea, the blood-red torrent rushed to Xueqi's side and consciously parted to the left and right. Long live Lord Marcus. We salute you, the great hero of the Alliance. As they rushed past, some knights did not forget to greet Xueqi. Xueqi had never been a knight, let alone a holy knight. But now, many knights in the army had grown up listening to the deified deeds of Xueqi. Many people had wondered if there really was such a powerful pharaoh who could change the situation of a battle by himself. Today, with their own eyes, they witnessed the return of this legendary figure who was like a myth. They only had one thought in their minds. His reputation was well deserved. As a mage, he led the charge. 1 man and 1 horse, yet an army of 10,000 could not stop him. He seemed weak, yet he took the head of the enemy's general as easily as taking something out of his pocket. Fortunately, Xueqi did not single-mindedly continue to kill. Otherwise, the 80,000 elite soldiers would have come to do nothing, and the Scarlet Cross army would have lost all face. Kill. Smash these broken bones. After Xueqi used the last of his magic power to shoot down the few gargoyles in the sky, the blood-red tide easily divided, destroyed, and crushed the scattered undead army. After an unknown amount of time, the Scarlet Cross army finally met up with the Dalajan army that had rushed out of the city. Xueqi. Where is Xueqi? Riding on a spotless white horse, using the ice element to repel all impurities, Antonida's appearance was getting more and more flashy. Escorted by a group of high-ranked mages and knights, Antonidas eagerly rushed to see Xueqi. On a small hill, Xueqi welcomed Antonidas with a Bendis on his left and Mograine on his right. Oh my god! Am I really seeing a ghost? Xueqi, you're actually still alive. Xueqi was a little embarrassed. The next second, Antonida's words made Xueqi a little unhappy. If the one who came to warn us wasn't Medivh, that guy who might have been blinded by the devil, but you, the Dalajan wouldn't have suffered such heavy losses. Sigh, why didn't you come back earlier? This was not a joke, but a real complaint. Chapter 737. Why did people often say that he was senile? When people got older, their bodily functions would decline. Many times, they would have a different way of dealing with things than when they were young. Before Xueqi traveled to this world, there was a psychological study. If a person did not try something that he thought was terrible before the age of 30, there was a 90% chance that he would not try it again after the age of 30. For example, bungee jumping. The Antonidas who appeared in front of Xueqi looked even older. Wrinkles crawled up every corner of his face. Although his eyes were still lively, the twinkle in his eyes told everyone that he was suspicious. You people from Lordaeron are only here now. Are you waiting for the Dalajan to kneel before you come to reap the rewards? You, Xueqi, did not come earlier or later. Arthas killed his father here, and you're already here? Seeing Antonida's gaze, Xueqi's heart skipped a beat. There were not many decades in one's life. 10 years might pass in a flash in the eyes of young people, but in the eyes of old people, it was extremely long. On the way here, it was not that Xueqi did not hear from Elugia about the filthy affairs of Lordaeron. In the past 10 years, the kingdom of Lordaeron had annexed the old territory of Alterac in order to expand their territory. In order to support his son, Tyrrhenas stripped Uther of his title indiscriminately because Uther opposed Arthas' slaughter of the orphanage. The Dalajan had begun to play closed door, refusing to export mages to other countries. King Garen of Stormguard was acting recklessly. Gilnis had closed the country. 10 years of open and secret strife was enough to wear away the camaraderie that had accumulated in the alliance against the Horde. The only fortunate thing was that the reconstruction and development of the kingdom of Stormwind and Cosmoden in the southern continent was quite good. At least the military framework of the alliance had been preserved. In the face of Antonida's rebuke, Duke was neither humble nor pushy. Karazhan is surrounded by countless spatial rifts in the void. It was not easy for me to find a gap, and I just rushed back. Mograine quickly tried to smooth things over. Lord Antonidas, now is not the time to blame anyone. We can slowly figure out who is at fault for this disaster later. Don't you think that the first thing we need to deal with is the King of the Dead who claims to want to turn the entire continent into Lordaeron's territory? Both Xueqi and Antonida's eyelids twitched. This wasn't the nearly immortal life of the elves, but the taboo of the walking of the dead. Let a group of ghost-like monsters kill all the living and rule the world? Other than those cursing sect cultists who had lost their minds for immortality, who else would do such a thing? In the face of the larger conflict of life and death, the dirty matters between countries could only be regarded as small conflicts. Like pebbles on the roadside, they could only be thrown aside. Antonidas narrowed his eyes, wrinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. He pursed his lips. Are we going to join forces with those green-skinned monsters? Apart from the pitiful youths who hadn't experienced the first or second battle of the Dark Portal, no one in the Alliance would have a good impression of the Beast Men. Cooperate? If we can't defeat Arthas, that scum who killed his own father, then I will consider it. Antonidas was about to say something, but Xueqi's next words made him lose his temper. At least the Beast Men are living people, aren't they? Do you want to see the Beast Men get killed by the Scourge and turn into stronger zombies to attack the Dalajan? Everyone smiled bitterly. The undead calamity hadn't been around for long. As the frontline commanders, they had figured out the pattern. Those who were strong in life would be strong after death. If the zombies that the civilians turned into after death were trash, then the Beastmen zombies had at least 50 combat power. If Arthas slaughtered all the Beastmen now, it would be bad. The leaders of the Alliance looked at each other and immediately came to a consensus. Just as the bugler was about to blow the horn, Xueqi said, "After that, use this horn and blow this." Xueqi magically took out a giant horn that was obviously Beastman style. Woo woo woo. At first, the Alliance had no problem with it. However, the Alliance immediately realized that something was wrong. This seemed to be the Beastman's horn. Everyone looked at the bugler on the hill who was blowing the giant Beastman horn. They really didn't know what the Alliance leaders were doing. "Stop looking. The commander of this battle is Duke Marcus. Do you think you can understand Lord Marcus's plan?" The middle-level commanders scolded the soldiers below. On the central battlefield, a few kilometers away, the 4 Horde heroes were engaged in a fierce battle with Arthas, Thrall, Rexer, Grom, and Orgrim. These 4 Horde heroes were definitely fierce people who could fight against 1,000 men. The 4 of them ganged up on Arthas. They thought that they could take him down no matter what. The Death Knights first appeared in the Horde. As a monster created by Gul'dan, Orgrim was still a little wary. He knew about the skills of the Death Knights. However, as the most powerful Death Knight under the command of Lich King Azul, Arthas with Frostmourne was far more powerful than Orgrim had imagined. Corpse manipulation made the surrounding Beastman warriors attack the 4 Horde heroes instead. Evil Aura increased the movement speed and attack speed of nearby undead allies. The most disgusting was Death Coil. Many times, Arthas' armor had already been smashed, and even his body had been injured. With an extreme Death Coil, a besieging Beastman would immediately fall. At first, Orgrim thought that these were just spells. He even had a few newly trained shamans try to interrupt Arthas with all kinds of shock. Later, he sadly found out that it was a suicide mission. On the battlefield full of corpses and the living, Arthas was simply invincible. Of course, the most terrifying thing was the Frostmourne that emitted a strange and terrifying aura. Orgrim saw with his own eyes that a shaman who was killed by this magic sword turned into a zombie. Even his soul was sucked into this evil rune magic sword, unable to reincarnate. At first, Orgrim and Grom could suppress Arthas with their superb martial arts. Who knew that this former Prince of Lordaeron was also a true martial arts genius? After a dozen rounds, they were evenly matched with Orgrim and Grom. After 50 rounds, if it wasn't for Thrall's sudden attacks and Rexer's occasional battle pets to block Arthas' killer moves, at least one of Grom or Orgrim would have been defeated. This can't go on. Just when the 4 Horde heroes were in a difficult situation, they suddenly heard a strange horn sound that belonged to the Horde. Chapter 738. The Horn of the Horde was very special. Of course, ordinary humans wouldn't be able to remember the cadence and rise and fall of the horn. Xueqi had never been an ordinary person. As long as they systematically intercepted the name of the Horde and compared it with the actions of the Horde, it would be easy to analyze it. After all, the grammar of the Orc language wasn't too different from the grammar of the common language. Generally speaking, it was still a subject, predicate, object structure. Once they understood this, they would understand. The horn that came from the Human Alliance translated into Orc language. "We will attack the enemy from the north. Please cooperate." "No, this isn't our horn." Orgrim was the first to realize. "Whose?" Before Thrall could ask, a trumpeter nearby already asked, "Which tribe are you from?" The other side was silent for a few seconds before the sound of a bugle horn was heard. Then, Orgrim's side was silent for a few seconds. For a moment, Orgrim almost wanted to turn around and run at all costs. Wasn't this a trap? Thrall was stunned for a moment and almost got hit by Arthas. He rolled on the ground awkwardly to avoid Frostmourne's horizontal slash. It wasn't just the 4 Horde heroes. The entire Orc army was in an uproar. It was a note that hadn't been played by a trumpeter for more than 10 years. This note only meant one thing. It was a name that was almost forgotten. No old Orc wanted to mention it, but they had to remember it. Duke Marcus. The general meaning of the horn was, "I'm Xueqi. Do you need help? If not, I'll leave."
On the Horde side, those who only had muscles left in their heads and were always saying, "Don't be a coward, just do it." Their graves were already 3 feet high. Those who could survive more than 10 years of hiding were not idiots.
Not to mention these big orc bosses. Orgrim and Rexer were captured in the Battle of Scorching Canyon, and it took them many years to escape. Grom was chased by the Windrunner sisters in Tirisful Glades for many years. At first, it was the eldest and second sisters, and then Sylvanas chased him for a long time. Although Sal had changed places, he had been a slave gladiator for a long time.
The unusual movements of the human army, the heavy weapons that were left behind in the military camp, the sudden attack of the Calamity army, the ridiculously powerful leader of the Death Knights, and finally Xueqi, who had revealed his identity. If they still didn't know that this was all Xueqi's plan, then Orgrim and the others would have wasted their lives.
"It's that demon Xueqi?"
Grom used Bloodhowl to block Arthes's attack head-on as he cursed. "How dare he say that he's joining forces with us?
He's the only one who can be so shameless."
Orgrim gritted his teeth as he gave Arthes another blow with his hammer. His mouth was filled with bitterness.
"What do we do?" Sal shouted. "What to do? What else could he do?"
Even if they knew that it was Xueqi, that bastard who dug a hole for them, the whole tribe would still be in trouble.
What else could they do? Could he still beg for mercy from that inhumane dead face? Arthes couldn't wait to turn them all into corpses. The tribe could have a backbone and not let Xueqi come over. Maybe the humans would find a way to deal with the additional hundreds of thousands of orc zombies. But so what? But if the humans didn't come over, the tribe would kneel. Now the tribe wanted to revive, not be destroyed here. Orgrim dodged and used a dying beastman as a shield to block Arthas, Death's coil.
Thrall, do you understand? As a leader, there are many times when your decisions are accompanied by pain.
Pain? Yes.
Ever since he was young, he had regarded Xueqi as his enemy and Xueqi as his imaginary enemy. Finally, this legendary, possibly dead great devil had appeared in front of him. Who would have thought that in their first meeting, they would fall into Xueqi's trap and have to beg Xueqi to save them? The feeling of being fooled and crushed by Xueqi in terms of intelligence filled every cell in Sal's body. However, Thrall was determined and wise. He exchanged glances with Orgrim and quickly made a decision. 5 kilometers to the north, the Scarlet Cross army had regrouped after a battle that was not too intense.
Although they weren't completely unscathed, it was definitely a rare victory. More than 200,000 zombies, tens of thousands of ghouls, and thousands of cave demons and gargoyles had been destroyed. The Dalajan infantry regiment was organizing to clear out the remaining enemies and carefully collect the corpses, preparing to burn them all. Xueqi had said that even if the corpses were disassembled, the Scourge could still use the bones to create more terrifying undead creatures. Duke's description of the Scourge army had easily frightened a few members of the Kirin Tor parliament. Xueqi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it wasn't the Scourge yet. The abomination, a monster made from a large number of corpses and a mountain of flesh, had yet to be born. Similarly, the evil dark liches hadn't developed the blood and bone puppets, which were a mixture of flesh and bones. It seemed that Arthas hadn't gotten the Ice Dragon army either. The Scourge now was far weaker than it had been in history. Well, it should be the same for Arthas. The original Arthas had experienced the massacre of the holy city of Stratholme, and the mental blow he had suffered was far greater than the burning of an orphanage. After all, it was a competition between him and the Dreadlord to see who could burn the infected residents faster but hadn't completely turned into zombies. The torture of conscience like a deathmatch was definitely much greater than burning a group of orphans. It was true that he was now the most powerful Death Knight, but the human nature left in his soul made his dark powers far weaker than he had been at the same time in history. This was what Xueqi could make use of. As long as the Horde's fierce warriors were the vanguard, Xueqi had a 50% chance of making Arthas kneel here. After the horns sounded, Mograine was a little nervous and a little perturbed. Will the Horde agree? It wasn't just the Horde that couldn't change their minds. The alliance was almost the same. Suddenly hearing that they wanted to ally with the Horde? If the one who made this proposal wasn't the legendary hero and the current commander of the alliance, Xueqi, the generals below would have already made a fuss. If anyone has the confidence to defeat an undead army led by a death demigod with just the strength of humans, I'll give him the position of commander. Xueqi's one sentence suppressed everyone's different opinions. At this moment, Xueqi's lips curled into a confident smile.
The horde will agree.
Chapter 739. As soon as Xueqi finished speaking, a clear and sunny voice interrupted. If that's the case, count me in for the surprise attack later. Xueqi was dumbfounded.
Your Highness Kale, that's?
It was the handsome high elf Prince Kale, that Sunstrider.
If he had not come, Xueqi would have almost forgotten that ever since he led the army to surround Salis and failed, Prince Kale, that's whose reputation had plummeted, was once again sent to the Dalajan by his father and the Silver Moon Council to further his studies.
Yes, it was indeed to study exile. Sometimes, Xueqi could not help but wonder if he was too dazzling and had instead caused trouble for Kale, that's. However, who could be blamed for that battle back then? If Kale, that's had really been possessed by the god of war and defeated the horde, then Xueqi would not have been able to retreat thousands of soldiers with one flag. Looking at Kale, that's sincere face, Duke suddenly had the urge to help this bitter prince no matter what in the future if he had the chance. Arthas, who has Frostmourne, is likely to have demigod-level strength, even though he has not fully unleashed it yet. As Xueqi said this, the smile on Kale that's face became gentler. If you're not afraid, what should I be afraid of? Your Highness, you. It was very rare for Xueqi to see something called courage on Kale that's face. We all have the same life. I don't think I'm any different from you. As a Kirin Tor counselor, there's nothing wrong with risking my life to protect the city I work for, right? No. Kaisi, you've heard of me. We're really different. I can run back to the corpse and resurrect. Since 15 years ago, you've bravely defended this world time and time again. 15 years have passed, but I've accomplished nothing. I'm beginning to realize that it's my inner cowardice that's restricting my progress. No. Kaisi, when you realize that death will only lose your moral integrity, you won't be afraid of death. Today I think I should take this step. Alright, take a step. Don't blame me if you pull your balls. Xueqi no longer had any anger towards Kale, that's, who had transformed into Xuanzang's chanting state. At this moment, a series of high-pitched and low-pitched bugles came from the distant battlefield. Hee. As expected of a tribe. Xueqi smiled. What did the green dwarf say? Antonidas asked. Xueqi pursed his lips and translated, we can work together this time. After that, we'll still be enemies. Humph. Several big shots of the alliance snorted coldly. Their faces were filled with a strange expression that said, beast men are so unreasonable. Xueqi didn't dare to speak. At the end of the day, he was the one who had dug the pit for the orcs to jump into. Although the alliance and the horde had been enemies for generations, the orcs had indeed reached their limit as they wanted to cooperate with each other. Xueqi was also worried. He had been given such a bad hand as soon as he returned. If he had the elites of the watchtower, would he still need to make use of the orcs? First, the orcs were overturned, and then Arthas' doomsday army was flattened. The most troublesome thing was that the best holy knights weren't by his side. What could Xueqi do? We can act later, Antonidas said in a low voice. Xueqi glanced at the Breaking Dawn mage and sighed in his heart. Old man Antonidas is old, stubborn, and corrupted. If they acted later they could weaken the orcs, but in a sense they would also be watching the orcs and the Doomsday Army fight to the death. However, this was too short-sighted. At this point in time before Archimonde, the big shot of the Burning Legion, arrived, Arthas, as the strongest Death Knight, was the biggest threat. To a certain extent, the Alliance would benefit from an internecine outcome. It would be very difficult to trick the Horde into joining them. Xueqi didn't know if he could stop Archimonde's arrival. If he failed, it would obviously affect the upcoming Battle of Mount Hyjal. That would be the first time the Alliance, the Horde, and the Night Elves worked together. So after hearing Antonida's suggestion, Xueqi shook his head. No. Compared to the Horde, who has lost the courage to fight us, Arthas is the biggest threat. If we let the Horde go, it's just another battle. The Alliance will have an 80% chance of winning. However, if we let the Doomsday Army go, the entire Rotterdam will not see a single living person for 3 months. Xueqi's description of the future was a little exaggerated. However, the snowballing ability of the Doomsday Army to turn people into zombies was undoubtedly very shocking. Antonidas was silent. Woo woo woo, the Alliance's marching horns sounded. This time, there were no reckless cavalry charges. Instead, the heavy infantry with big shields was in front,
The spear team was in the third row, the javelin team and the archer team were in the middle, and the cavalry was in the two wings.
It was a standard Rotterdam army formation. At the back were the Daligen mages and their guards.
The infantry and cavalry trotted all the way in a perfect and oppressive formation, pushing straight towards the back of Arthas's doomsday army.
Don't be afraid. Don't hesitate. The holy light shines on us. Those monsters are no longer our family. They're evil undead. Blow up their heads and chop off their claws. Don't stop until their heads are smashed into smashed watermelons. Even if these monsters bite you, they might turn you into monsters like them. The wounded should retreat immediately and request for the priest's holy light treatment. If there are no priests or paladins around, when you lose all feeling in your limbs, you have to break them immediately before the numbness spreads to your body. Otherwise, you'll become a damned living dead. Bring the holy water with you. It will save your life at the critical moment. The Alliance's lieutenants kept shouting, reminding the soldiers of various things to take note of. Those were originally the experiences that the Silver Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade had gained from decades of extremely tragic and cruel wars in history. They were distributed by Duque in advance. No one knew how Duque got those experiences. However, just like the veterans who had become officers, they believed in Duque unconditionally during the World War II at the Dark Portal. Now they still firmly believed in him. It was different from the orcs' wild way of killing their enemies. The orcs killed 10,000 of their enemies and lost 3,000 of their own. Then, these 3,000 would turn into zombies to find trouble with their own people. The Alliance's destruction of the Doomsday Army could be said to be quite thorough. Most of the zombies and ghouls that pounced on them were first baptized by the mages' firewall spell, and then by the arrows and javelins before they could reach the front of the formation. When the sparse undead pounced on them, the third and fourth rows of spearmen would often accurately pierce the heads of these undead that were charging straight at them. If there were any that slipped through the net, a sword and shield soldier would first hold them off. Then, several spears would directly stab the zombies into specimens. Finally, the sword and shield soldier would use short swords to chop the zombies into parts. Chapter 740. At first, the orcs were very dissatisfied when they saw how slowly the humans were advancing. Even though the chiefs announced that the humans were temporary allies, the orcs still despised the humans. They felt that the humans were only doing their job. Soon, the orcs began to change their opinion. If the orcs' battle line was an unstable blender, with zombies often breaking through the defense line, then the humans' battle formation was the most terrifying shredder. Tens of thousands of scourge soldiers pounced on the humans' battle formation. It looked like a raging wave crashing onto the shore, but it was useless. The most threatening gargoyles were destroyed by Duque and several other archmages before they could even dive over. The gargoyles were directly smashed into stone pieces in mid-air and fell to the ground. The second biggest threat was the cave dweller demons. These demons threw small poisonous spiders as long-range attacks, causing a lot of trouble for the Alliance army. But that was only the extent of trouble. The cave dweller demons' huge bodies made them easy targets for the human archmages and archers. Usually, 8 to 10 fireballs would hit them, and even the strongest cave dweller demons would be smashed into pieces.
Arthas' army of the undead was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye.
The entire huge black battle formation was smashed into pieces from the north and south.
This is impossible.
Through the soul connection, Arthas also sensed the decline of his army. He suddenly turned around and saw the imposing Scarlet Cross army. It was like the rising sun, driving away the darkness. That fiery red light almost dazzled his pale and handsome dead face.
Ras Frost Whisper, hold the north side. Sensing the death of the Dark Dean, Ras Frost Whisper already knew that the Alliance army was not to be trifled with.
Unfortunately, as the substitute of the Lich King, Arthas' status and will were absolute.
Lich King Nazul, who had become a pure soul and was sealed in a block of ice, would certainly not allow Ras Frost Whisper to be a scapegoat for such a small matter. The bitter Reese could only lead his warlock brothers and the low-level Lich to command a large number of low-level undead to go up against them.
Kale, that's a Bendis. Duque pointed at Ras Frost Whisper. Even if Kale, that was a noble prince, since he had entered the Alliance's ranks, he was Duque's subordinate. With a flick of Duque's finger, Kale, that's, who had a few arcane fireballs hovering above his head, immediately flashed out to meet Ras Frost Whisper. As an immortal, he had an instinctive aversion to fire.
Becoming a lich meant that he no longer had any fate with fire magic. Compared to Kale, who was like a miniature sun, Ras Frost Whisper represented endless winter. At first glance, Kale // Flame Elemental Ball and Rice / Frost Elemental Ball were like two paintings of completely different styles, forcibly piecing them together. Endless fire and frost elements from the elements realm were molded into the form of magic spells and bombarded towards the opponent constantly. For a time, it turned into a magic war. As one of the bosses of Scholomance, Ras Frost Whisper was quite strong. His Frost Arrow Rain was able to put Kale, who lacked actual combat experience, into a fluster. Seeing the way Kale attacked, Xueqi only wanted to facepalm. Although they were both radiant moons, how could an unorthodox lich like Ras Frost Whisper compare to a proper elven prince? However, Kale really did not have much experience in real magic battles, and in the end, it was the elven prince who was suppressed. Can't he use fire just because he's good at it? An arcane bomb will teach him a lesson. Xueqi muttered softly. Who knew that Kale, that pair of elven long ears, would listen to Xueqi's side? The rich guy was actually enlightened. The former Earl of Reese raised his fleshless skeletal hands. Just as he was about to use a hand gesture to launch a new spell, an unexpected scene happened. It was a large fireball that exploded about 5 meters in front of him. Unexpectedly, after being offset by his frost arrow, the fireball exploded. Suddenly, a purplish-blue light flashed in the middle of the fireball, and an arcane bomb that contained an enormous amount of magic power suddenly accelerated. Then, it shot from lightning to less than 2 meters in front of Ras and exploded before it could touch his magic shield. A violent arcane impact surged over, and the lich was caught off guard. He withstood the damage of the arcane spell, but he was unable to offset the terrifying shockwave that exploded in all directions. The bitter Ras only saw a flash of purplish-blue arcane spell. The shockwave of the explosion first pressed a hemispherical depression into the translucent ice shield that covered his body. Then, his entire body was sent flying. Liches never lacked calm. However, the turbulence of the arcane explosion also interfered with his flash spell. As a result, he was smashed into the ground like a cannonball. The huge impact blasted a large crater in the battlefield full of flesh and bones. The surroundings were full of exploding flesh and blood. Broken limbs and fragments scattered on the ground like the pitter-patter of rain. Ras was in a sorry state in this explosion. His gorgeous purplish-red mage robe was blown into rags, and even the bones of his fingers that withstood the impact showed signs of breaking. Before he could climb out of the deep pit, a huge golden shadow suddenly flashed out of the pit in front of him. The golden light, the white gold warhorse, and the holy power that was full of awe-inspiring righteousness. 1 man and 1 horse. But it had the terrifying momentum of thousands of soldiers and horses charging at the same time. Ras Frost Whisper, who had not yet figured out what happened, first felt his face heat up, and then he immediately felt the holy light contained in the holy light hammer and the destructive power it brought to his body. "Ah!" The lich had long lost his voice, but the trembling sound that came from his soul still echoed in all directions. His ugly skull, which no longer had any flesh, directly exploded under the full force of General Alfred Abendus' blow into countless tiny bone fragments that splattered in all directions. Lich Ras Frost Whisper. Killed. At the same time, 3 people joined the battle between the 4 tribal heroes and Arthas. Mograine, Antonidas and Duke Marcus. Orgrim and Arthas said this name at the same time, which to them was a terrible name. Xueqi smiled and waved his hand. Yo, the weather is really nice today. Thrall looked at the dark sky covered by the canopy of undead, and found that he could not understand Xueqi's thoughts. Xueqi stood with his hands behind his back, ignoring Arthas, who was looking at him with hatred, and walked up to Orgrim. You and I have no intention of forgetting the pain of the past. But for the future of our race, how about we work together for once? Orgrim was silent for a moment. All right. A small fist and a huge fist collided lightly. Chapter 741. If it was the first great chief, he would have chosen to deal with Xueqi first, and then see if he could deal with Arthas. In fact, the first batch of orcs who drank the demon's blood were mostly brainless fellows who thought that they should not be afraid, just fight. Time could wear down a person's mind. Orgrim was no longer the hot-blooded leader who thought that he could conquer the world just because he controlled the tribe. In addition, after more than 10 years, he had experienced glory, but he had also experienced hardships. He had been a great chieftain, but he had also been a prisoner. He had seen the splendor of civilization, and he had been a barbarian for almost 10 years. Orgrim had seen everything in the world. When the demon's blood gradually faded, the orcs were still brave, but they were no longer violent. Orgrim knew that in a sense, the orcs were also victims who had been deceived. However, this did not mean that they could erase the terrible history of destruction and slaughter in the world of Azeroth. Just like back then, in order to fight against the Alliance, he did not hesitate to bring Death Knights and Trolls into the tribe. In the face of the greater threat of the Scourge army, he led Sar to temporarily compromise with the Alliance. The only thing that Orgrim was glad about was that the person he reached this temporary agreement with was Duke Marcus, the enemy he hated the most in the past. The person he hated the most was also the person he understood the most. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as the Alliance had a new general, Orgrim would definitely force Sar to retreat even if he had to sacrifice his life. But Duque. Orgrim did not know if Duque was still the same Duque from back then. If Duque was still the sensible Duque from back then, the tribe would not have suffered a loss this time. Of course, from the actions of first kicking the tribe into a pit and then rescuing them. Although he was unhappy, that Duque was definitely the real Duque and not someone in disguise. On the other side, Arthas was shocked and angry when he first saw Duque. This was because Duque had repeatedly ruined his plans, or rather, the mission given to him by the Lich King. The destruction of 500,000 Undyings was a significant loss to the Scourge army. As soon as Duque appeared, Arthas was no longer in a hurry to attack. He stood with his sword and displayed Frostmourne, which emitted a cold and terrifying glow in front of everyone. This was Arthas's pride. He was once a prince, and he was now a king. Although he was the king of the kingdom of the dead. Oh, Duque! How rare, I thought you were already dead. Arthas's face was filled with contempt and ridicule. Duque showed no mercy. I also thought you were dead. Why are you still talking like a living person? Arthas's expression stiffened. Hoo-hoo! Ha-ha-ha-ha! Perhaps it was because Grom Hellscream had a low sense of humor, but seeing his old rival, Duque, ridiculing his new, more annoying opponent, Grom actually laughed out loud in the midst of the chaotic battlefield. Don't mind me, you guys continue. This time Arthas's face darkened. You don't understand. Only death is eternal. Duque was disdainful. You're the one who doesn't understand. Didn't you see the Lich King Nazul turn a stray dog on the roadside into a Death Knight like you? Only the most powerful living can become the most powerful dead. Without the creation of life, your so-called kingdom of the dead is nothing. Even though they were enemies before, Thrall felt very satisfied when he heard Duque ridicule Arthas, who had just shouted, In the name of the Lich King Nazul, I grant you all eternity. At first, the tribe didn't understand how these living dead came to be. But when they heard the name of the Lich King, Orgrim and the others were very unhappy. Nazul was the great chieftain of the third generation, but now he ran to the Burning Legion to become a Bull-Shastrisk Lich King and continuously blaspheme the dead? After abandoning the power of the demons, the tribe had now begun to return to the original path of the shaman, which was to believe in their ancestors and the power of the elements. This practice of making the dead unable to rest in peace was undoubtedly the biggest taboo of the beast men. Duque humiliated Arthas by saying that the stray dog on the roadside had become a Death Knight, especially for a young man like Thrall. Although he didn't say it on the surface, he couldn't help but acknowledge Duque a little more. On the other side, when Arthas's face was distorted to the extreme, he was so angry that he actually laughed. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Interesting. This is really interesting. Duque tilted his head. A strange soul. I didn't expect to see such an interesting scene after becoming a Death Knight. The corner of Arthas's mouth curved up. I'm afraid no one would have thought that the legendary great hero Duque, who killed millions of beast men and led the Alliance to victory in the Battle of the Dark Portal with unparalleled wisdom, would actually have such a vulgar soul. Haha. Even the beast men next to you are much more noble than you. Arthas was referring to Orgrim and Thrall. In fact, what he said was also nonsense. If Orgrim wasn't noble, Lothar's Quel'Thalam wouldn't have collapsed at such a crucial time. Most people would be angry when they were scolded for having a dirty soul. After all, this was an era where the noble spirit of chivalry was prized. Unfortunately, Duque was a transmigrator. He retorted with his hands on his waist. Hee hee. I'm a pervert and I'm not afraid of anyone. No matter how much I like money, fame, status and beautiful women, no matter how vulgar my soul is, at least I use my wisdom and strength to protect humans in this world. No matter what, I'm more noble than a bastard like you who killed your father and destroyed your country. Earthies, stop struggling. Obediently dismantle your body and then go to hell to repent. Humph. The once noble prince let out a cold snort. When Frostmourne enters your body and subdues your soul, I will be very interested in making you my assistant. Your wisdom can help His Majesty the Lich King better rule this world.
Duque face-bombed. This child is hopeless. All right, for Kalia's sake. After I kill you, I will properly burn your body and let you rest in peace. Sister Kalia is still alive? Arthes's eyebrows jumped. Yes. After you killed your father, Kalia had to just announce that she was the queen of Lordaeron. Duque took a step forward. Unknowingly, his aura became shocking. Why did he have to argue with Earthes? It was very simple. Only Earthes, whose soul had fallen to the extreme, could truly unleash the power of Frostmourne. On the other hand, Arthes, who had a crack in his soul, would have his strength greatly reduced. First, he used the Horde to deplete the Scourge army, then with the Alliance army, and finally, Kalia was Duque's real trump card. Chapter 742. If possible, Duque didn't want to use such a despicable method. It was a tragedy that Arthas had fallen from a great prince to a death knight, but unfortunately, Duque, who had been blasted into the void, couldn't stop him in time. However, just because he made a mistake once didn't mean he could make a mistake again. Arthas was already dead, walking further and further down the path of evil. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before he became the second Lich King. If they didn't stop Arthes, then the tragedy of history would repeat itself. He thought about the eastern and western plague lands that occupied 1/3 of the Rotterdam continent in the future. That place was a vast and boundless land of despair that spanned thousands of miles. The earth was corroded, and the plants were withering and mutating. The ground was filled with terrifying undead creatures and infected mutated animals. Duque could still remember the deers that were covered in abscesses wailing in despair, and the squirrels that had turned into hideous monsters. Perhaps it could be said that the mastermind behind the spread of all this was the crazy Kel Thuzad, the Lich King Nazul who was tamed by Kil Jaden. However, without Arthas, the main culprit, carrying the flag, the Scourge army would not be able to do this. In the original history, after the destruction of the Rotterdam city, many resistance organizations emerged in the territory of the Rotterdam Kingdom. In addition to the Silver Hand Knights, which was disbanded by Arthas before he fell, and the most famous Scarlet Crusade and Silver Dawn, there were actually many other organizations. For example, the Northern Army of Lordaeron, which was later led by Marshal Garithus, and the Andoral Garrison Army, Darrowshire Garrison Army, Hearth Valley Garrison Army, and other local armies of Lordaeron. There were also various civil resistance organizations. These organizations had effectively restrained or hindered the advance of the Scourge. However, when King Dylan led his fleet to rescue the people of Lordaeron, he was shocked to discover that the entire land of Lordaeron was filled with undead. Why? It was because most of the rebel groups had been destroyed. The Scarlet Crusade was being toyed with by the Dreadlord. The rebel armies were destroyed one after another. Arthes alone had killed his teacher, Uther, and one of the 5 Silver Sages, Gavin Rad, back in the original timeline. In total, there are the leader of Lordaeron's Scourge Resistance Organization, the Justice Guard, Marcus Halak, the leader of the Circle of Holy Light, the Lordaeron Calamity Resistance Organization, the leader of the ultimate force of the Lordaeron Cataclysm Resistance Organization, Daglan. That was just within the borders of Lordaeron. Other than Lordaeron, Arthas, who was unstoppable by anyone, led the Calamity Army to sweep across the entire Lordaeron continent. Many important figures died under Frostmourne's sword. Dalajan Kirin Tor Antonidas, Elf Ranger General Sylvanas, Sun King Anastrian. More than 10 million people had died directly or indirectly at Arthes's hands. Now that the apocalyptic drama of the Scourge army had begun, the avalanche effect had begun. The easiest way to prevent the greatest tragedy in the history of Azeroth was to kill Arthas. This was definitely not easy. Duque did not have the strength to destroy a planet in 1 move or the strength to destroy a universe in 2 moves. All he could do was gamble everything he had as a transmigrator. Feeling sorry for Kalia,
Xueqi still put his cards on the table. Sure enough, for the first time, Earthy's face, which seemed as if she didn't care about anything, showed some emotion. No. You lied to me. Korea died 13 years ago. Yes. In order to escape the shame of her fiancé being Nethario, the wing of death, and in order not to be imprisoned in the palace and waste her youth, she begged me to let her fake her death. Xueqi spoke almost word by word. At the same time, he raised his hand, and a magic mirror appeared in Xueqi's hand. The interference of the canopy of undead made it impossible to send a magic message. This was not important. With a system elf, Xueqi could perfectly copy the communication image that Kalia had sent to all parts of Lordaeron before she teleported away. I am Kalia Menethil. I did not die 13 years ago. I regret to tell you a sad news. My brother, Arthas Menethil, has been persecuted by the Dread Lord and the evil Lich of the Cursed God. He has become a Death Knight and lost his humanity. He killed my father, His Majesty Terenas. In the name of the Menethil royal family, I, Kalia Menethil, officially inherit the throne of Lordaeron and become the queen. Kalia's tone had changed slightly, and her youthful appearance had been stripped away. Even though Kalia had changed quite a bit, Arthas was still able to recognize her elder sister immediately due to the connection between their bloodlines. Sister. His mouth twitched for a while. Arthas, the most terrifying man of this era, who had gone from the brightest to the darkest, suddenly cried like a child. The undead did not have tears. It was just a hollow, dry howl. In the next moment, just when everyone thought that Xueqi had taken care of such a terrifying enemy with just his mouth, frost suddenly fell from the sky. Frost in June was never a good thing. Suddenly, an incomparably huge will descended. It was hard to describe this feeling of terror. At that moment, it was as if there were thousands of lives, letting out the most desperate wails before they died at the same time. At that moment, it was as if there were billions of creatures being tortured by demons. Their skin was torn off, their flesh was peeled off, and their organs were dug out. They screamed as their bodies were burned by the flames. Finally, even their souls were thrown into purgatory to suffer for 10,000 years. Whether it was humans, orcs or elves, every creature could not help but hold their breath. Their chests felt as if they were being crushed by a huge rock, and they could no longer expand their lungs. It was an oppressive feeling of despair. At this moment, everyone finally realized that there was a terrifying existence behind this Death Knight who was getting stronger and stronger. It was watching and directing everything. Xueqi. An old and evil voice echoed in everyone's mind. Duke Marcus. The voice was like thunder, causing everyone's brains to buzz. Nazul? How have you been recently? Xueqi was not affected at all. Oh, I forgot. After you were tortured to death by Kill Jaden, you have become a toy that can only stay in ice. You have no body. As soon as these words came out, everyone was petrified. Xueqi is too powerful. We can't even breathe. And Xueqi still has the leisure to tease such a terrifying Lich King? How big is Xueqi's heart? Or, how strong is Xueqi? How can he not have the slightest fear in the face of such an existence? Chapter 743. The Beast Men might not understand why their legendary shaman had become a Lich King. In fact, the humans did not understand either. Nazul had been hiding in the frozen continent of Northrend for many years. Then, after a long period of preparation, he revealed the shocking news of Earthy's killing his father and massacring an entire city. Everyone did not know, but that did not mean that Xueqi did not know. Moreover, as the person who had personally overturned Nazul in the magic mirror 10 years ago, Xueqi definitely had the right to speak more than anyone else in the alliance. Since there were too many things that could not be verified, Duke might as well use what he knew as a transmigrator to present the final version in front of everyone. The leader was angry. Oh no, it was the dirty demon king who was angry. Nazul was ridiculed and flew into a rage. A huge black gas in the air turned into a huge tornado, violently blasting towards Xueqi. However, Xueqi did not move, as if he was dumbfounded in place. He even made a gesture to stop Mograine from making a move. The black tornado fell, and then there was no then. Seeing the tornado suddenly disappear, both the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde were stunned. Instead, Xueqi chuckled and said, "Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Nah, Zul, you are really regressing. Oh sorry, I forgot that you are already dead. If you can really kill me easily in Northrend, then I will not resist. I will just surrender. As long as I can withstand your mental attack, you cannot do anything to me at all. You. If Zul still had lungs, they would definitely explode. In the end, you are just a soul being played by killed Jaden, a mere pawn with experimental significance. So what if you use the scourge to sweep the entire continent? So what if you do as killed Jaden said and summon that descend to Azeroth? When that time comes, you will also lose your value. I don't need to say what happens to the poor guy abandoned by the Burning Legion, right? Ha ha ha. At this moment, Nazul was shocked. He was truly shocked. He did not understand how Duque knew about this task that killed Jaden had personally given him. Yes, that's right. Using the undead to destroy the world was just a pretense to scare outsiders. As long as there were enough dragon aspects in this world, humans, a race with low combat power, would not be able to do anything to this world even if they all became immortals. Kill Jaden's real purpose was naturally for Azul to find a way to open a portal and summon the other commander of the Burning Legion, Archimonde, to the world of Azeroth. However, Duke revealed the deepest secret in his heart and his greatest fear. Nazul had always been worried about whether he would be abandoned by Kill Jaden after he was no longer of any value to Nazul. Tell me, how could Nazul not be terrified? How could he not be afraid? For a moment, Nazul almost wanted to become a traitor of the Burning Legion and jump from a traitor to a loyal subject. Alas, just as he had that thought, a pair of blazing eyes seemed to open at the end of the distant void, glancing in the direction of Azeroth. Nazul's loyalty to the Burning Legion was immediately maxed out. It seemed. He suddenly shouted in a stern voice. Insignificant mortals! You don't know the greatness of the great commander, Sir Kill Jaden. You will die. You will definitely die. Duke laughed shamelessly. Then, he raised his right index finger and waved it arrogantly. Haha! Are you threatening me? Nazul, you are not qualified. I can kill you once, and I can kill you a second time. You! Nazul was about to go crazy because of Duque. Who knew what would happen next? Don't say that you can't. I'm not even afraid of your boss's boss, Sargeras. Do you think I'm afraid of Kill Jaden? Duque sneered. Even if they were not allies, even Sal couldn't help but want to laugh. On the Alliance's side, a large number of people showed admiration for Duque. Should it be said that Duque was indeed a legendary hero? If it were anyone else, it would be impossible to have such confidence. But Duque did. Nazul broke into Karazhan alone, and then he was turned into a dead dog by Duque. Nazul's death was definitely related to Duque. And Sargeras was beaten into the abyss, and Duque was definitely the culprit. What was confidence? This was confidence. Before any evil demon could really step on Duque, it was likely that Duque's undefeated legend would continue. That's right. Duque was arrogant, but Duque had the capital to be arrogant. Arthas, go kill Duque. I want Duque's soul to be like me, sealed in a small space and suffer eternal torture. Dirty Demon King, you're showing your cowardice. Isn't this admitting that you're really a prisoner? However, Nazul's ultimate move was still very imposing. The dark aura that lingered on the entire battlefield was attracted at the same time. The black aura that was visible to the naked eye was converging, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, from a thin line to a thick line, from a thick line to a huge pillar of air like a river, and finally compressed into a bright black light, shooting into Arthas' body. Soon, accompanied by a burst of bones, Arthas that no one had ever seen before, and that had never appeared in history, appeared in front of everyone. More than 2.5 meters tall, his muscles explosively expanded. Like the Hulk, Arthas became the focus of everyone's attention. The power of darkness occupied Arthas' body, recondensing into fierce and lifelike metal skeleton decorations. These decorations assembled into a larger armor that wrapped around Arthas' body. Arthas suddenly took a step forward, and even the earth rumbled. At the same time, a large amount of dark aura flowed out from the pores on his thighs, giving people a feeling of shame. Duque, you're dead. I will kill you first, and then take my sister to the eternal world of the dead. Arthas gritted his teeth. Of course, as the price for angering me and insulting my master, Nazul. I will turn you into the dirtiest ghoul, and then all the women who love you will become the most abominable banshees. Duque once thought that there was nothing in this world that could anger him. How could the few curses that came and went in Azeroth compare to the profound and unfathomable curses of a nation? However, when the words ghoul and banshee jumped into his ears, Duque still felt an inexplicable anger. Damn you! I've been around for more than 10 years, and you want to go back to being a ghoul? And you want to kill my woman? F***CK. Didn't anyone tell you that the more arrogant the boss, the more miserable it is? Second fool. Hand over your invincible warhorse, and I promise not to touch your sister. Chapter 744. Before Duque transmigrated, how important was a rare mount in the eyes of a fanatical player? A living example illustrates all this very well. There was once an unlucky party leader called Lightsguide. Before defeating the final boss, Arthas, he said, "Even if I let you ride on my horses, I won't let you ride on my first, Invincible." Yes, that guy's girlfriend was also in the party at that time. Miraculously, she didn't fall out with him, and in the end, he even had a lover. Congratulations! Congratulations! Ahem, I went too far. However, a powerful mount was very important in raising one's level of coolness. Duque was very unhappy that wizards didn't have their own mounts. If he really accidentally overturned Arthas in advance, Duque would definitely not mind using the BMW, Invincible, that grew up with Arthas since childhood and was turned into an undead warhorse by Arthas after its death to play with it. Of course, the others didn't know that Duque would have so many boring and dirty thoughts in the face of a great enemy. That wasn't important. Sometimes, a person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. With all of Duque's miraculous feats in the past, everyone thought that Duque had a card up his sleeve. Grom. Duque spoke in standard orc language. Grom Hellscream bared his fangs. A human, an enemy of the orcs, could speak orc language so fluently. Grom couldn't get used to it no matter what. I heard that the Hellscream family is the best at killing Gorons. What about this mini Goron? Duque curled his lips and sneered at Arthas. Goron? He's only an ogre. He's not qualified to be a Goron. Grom exhaled and raised his famous blood howl, striding forward. Wait! Thrall wanted to warn Grom, but found that Orgrim had stopped him. No matter how he thought about it, in this dangerous temporary alliance, the first to attack the enemy would be at a disadvantage. No. Thrall. Orgrim spoke in the ancient orc shaman language. Even though it wasn't fluent, Thrall could understand it, and Duque probably didn't. Duque may be a bastard, but he's a capable man. Didn't you notice that Duque was the first to make his move? He just spouted a bunch of nonsense. No, if you look closely, Arthas might seem very strong now, but in reality, he's not even as strong as he was before. Sal's heroic rectangular face froze, and then he understood. That's right. In terms of pure strength alone, Arthas was extremely terrifying. He was already so terrifying that people wouldn't be able to stand steadily in front of him. However, Duque's words had clearly shaken Arthas' will and soul. Orgrim was right. Arthas was even more terrifying. Although Arthas wasn't as powerful as she was now, she still had the potential to grow infinitely. Why were the four of them able to hold on for so long in the face of a monster wielding a super demonic sword? Even if they didn't want to admit it, they had to admit that Arthas was using them as sparring partners. In the beginning, let alone the four Horde heroes, even a few Kiliarchs could hurt Arthas. However, this mysterious Death Knight only used the scarlet halo around his body, and sacrificed the servants he summoned to continuously recover his injured body parts and his strength. Following that, Arthas went from being unable to withstand the siege of the four heroes like a sandbag in the beginning, to occasionally defending later, and now to being able to fight back. Arthas' combat skills were growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was like a sponge absorbing water, absorbing the opponent's combat skills to speed up his own growth. This made Thrall and the others even more frightened. Now, Arthas' strength had increased. Even if it gave people the feeling of looking up to a tall mountain, a mountain was just that big. If there were enough people, there was still hope of flattening the entire mountain. Sal didn't know why he could do this when he mentioned Kalia. In any case, Duke displayed an unconventional method that really opened the young Sal's eyes. The Horde's most valiant warrior, Grom Hellscream, was the first to rush forward. It was a beautiful jump slash as always. The crouch that shook the earth, the jump path that defied common sense, was still shocking no matter how many times one saw it. As the commander of an army, Mograine rarely fought Grom directly. However, every time he did, Mograine would guard against Grom trying to decapitate him. After all, Mograine had personally seen the crazy Grom cut down a dwarf steam tank with one jump slash. The power of this attack was definitely not small. Arthas raised his sword to block it. He did manage to block it, but the huge force from Bloodhowl was something even his strengthened muscles couldn't withstand. Arthas' massive body could clearly be seen sinking into the ground, and the soil beneath her feet immediately sank in. It couldn't be considered a success. Grom immediately used the rebound force to engage in a fierce battle with Arthas. Go, Mograine. Abendis. There's no need to worry about the orcs. As long as we don't do anything sneaky, the orcs definitely won't attack us first. I even strongly recommend that you use Holy Flash on the orc heroes and give them blessings. Mograine and Abendis gritted their teeth and charged forward. Just as the two of them were charging, he raised his hand. When a light flashed across Grom's body, the Warsong chief was a little frightened for a moment. Duque's orc language floated over. Don't be afraid. This power is similar to your shaman's blessings. Power blessing. King's blessing. Power amplification from the holy light was definitely a good thing for a violent warrior like Grom. Ha! A horizontal slash that was even faster than before caused Arthas to stumble. Humph! With a cold snort, Arthas swung her sword in reverse, creating a gust of cold wind. This was the Death Knight's icy touch. It was this frost plague with a cold aura that caused the four orc heroes a lot of trouble. Grom didn't expect that in the next moment, his body would shine with a golden light. It was Abendis's holy light that helped him dispel the cold. All right. Even if he didn't want to admit it, the human's holy light had indeed helped Grom a lot. At this moment, Rexer and Orgrim looked at each other and charged forward at the same time. In an instant, 5 burly men surrounded Arthas. The main attacker was still the orc hero, while the 2 human paladins mainly used the power of the retribution element and the power of the holy element as support. Chapter 745. It just so happened that Arthas's body had become huge. Otherwise, the attacks of the 3 orc heroes were so wide and wild that there would be no way for 2 more people to get in between him. For the first time, Arthas felt a faint sense of irritation. The main attackers were the 3 giant orcs. With the help of 2 powerful paladins, his damage methods were obviously restrained. Every time he used all his strength to repel an orc hero, the paladin next to him would immediately rush forward to replace him. Compared to the orc warriors, the human paladins had stronger defense and were more difficult to deal with. At this moment, Duque's third order came. Kale that's. Burn the nearby corpses. The prince did as he was told without even frowning. In fact, Duque had originally guessed that Kale that's might not want to do it. After all, it was indeed a bit torturous to ask the dignified High Elven prince to act as an incinerator to clean up the corpses. Who knew that the prince would do as he was told? Kale's extremely gorgeous Phoenix Flame was fully activated. Almost every time he raised his hand, spots of red light would splash out like water. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. He did not expect that the legendary Fire Feather, the ultimate skill of Kale, that's Private Phoenix, AO, could be seen here. At first glance, each flame feather was only the flame of a lighter, but when the flame feather quickly shot towards the corpses on the ground, each corpse was instantly set on fire. Some corpses that had already begun to turn into immortals suddenly jumped up, roaring and struggling frantically. In a very short period of time, the shortest was less than 3 seconds. The entire corpse seemed to have been sent into an incinerator. Under the flames that were thousands of degrees high, it was easily charred and carbonized. Skin, muscles, and bones were all deformed due to the high temperature. The entire process took no more than 10 seconds. Even the large orc corpse, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, quickly turned into ashes and disappeared in the turbid wind that passed through the battlefield. If Arthas had only felt annoyed earlier, he now truly felt a sense of crisis. Death Knights represented the pinnacle of evil force. Death Knights had quite a few melee skills. Apart from corpses, they were best at playing with plagues and dark powers. The corpses around him were cleared in an instant. For Arthas, not only did this mean that his corpse resurrection, corpse explosion, undead army, and other skills that required corpses could not be used, The key was that without the undead servants, there was no skill like death contract that could sacrifice a servant to recover his physical damage. This was equivalent to forcibly interrupting his perfect cycle of recovery. Of course, he could use blood aura to forcibly extract power from his opponent to heal his injuries. However, a Death Knight could use more than one type of spiritual energy. Forcefully limiting the type of spiritual energy he could use would undoubtedly make his ability to respond worse. Impossible. The Death Knight was a very mysterious profession to the entire continent. When the first batch of Death Knights led by Tyrone Gorefiend appeared, countless human warriors were killed before they could figure out what the hell the Death Knights were or what skills they used. The Dalajan mages spent a great deal of effort to barely determine the attack type of the Death Knight. This was a general information that was exchanged with more than 4 digits of casualties. When the dark portal opened for the second time, there were traces of Death Knights. However, after that, the Death Knights disappeared from the entire Eastern Kingdom once again. The research and information on the Death Knights once again came to a standstill. Who would have thought that when Arthas faced Duke, she would actually feel uneasy, as though all of her skills were exposed in broad daylight for others to observe and study? Don't underestimate me. Arthas ruthlessly used Bloodstrike. Frostmourne turned into a dark red stream of light and slashed at Orgrim. The power was so great that it was beyond Orgrim's expectations. This was at least the terrifying power of 2 adult Gollins. Orgrim could not withstand it at all, and his huge body was directly sent flying. The rune greatsword's momentum did not decrease at all, and it continued to slash at Rexer. Rexer did not have a powerful weapon that could withstand the magic device, Frostmourne. As a last resort, he could only whistle and let his porcupine battle pet, Hover, take the hit. In his heart, he was already mentally prepared to sacrifice Hover. However, it was not that simple. The porcupine was instantly cut in half, and under Earthy's violent power, the momentum of the sword did not decrease. Instead, it increased, and it slashed at Rexer at an even faster speed. Not good. At this moment, even Sar, who was holding the line at the back, felt his hair stand on end. Seeing that Rexer was about to die, who would have thought that at the critical moment, Mograine would dash forward and use his greatsword to block Arthy's attack. Clang! Mograine's epic greatsword shattered. If not for the paladin's divine shield saving his life, perhaps the first sacrifice would have been made. Rexer spoke the broken common language that he had learned from the prison guards in the past, and with great difficulty, he said, "Thank you." This was not the end. Arthas used his back to take a heavy slash from Grom, and suddenly raised his palm. It was one of the Death Knight's signature skills, Death's Grasp. No one would have thought that Arthas's target was actually Kale, who seemed to be extremely safe, 80 yards away. Feeling the evil power quickly gathering around him, Kale's face turned green. He could clearly feel that the evil power was gathering into a huge claw. If he did not do anything, he would very likely be forcefully pulled in front of Arthas in the next second. It would be terrible for a mage to be closed in by a close combat professional. At first, he wanted to use Flash, but it did not work. He switched to Ice Barrier to save his life, but it still failed. Arthas' unparalleled evil power had completely expelled the ice, fire, and arcane elements from Kale's body in an instant. This was undoubtedly the suppression of a higher level of mysterious power against a lower level of power. The Elven Prince, who had no idea what Arthas had up his sleeves, was so shocked that the back of his mage robe was soaked in cold sweat. At this moment, Duke made his move. Kale, was shocked to find that an Elven Prince that looked exactly like him had appeared in front of him. In the blink of an eye, the replica Elven Prince was grabbed by the huge black hand, leaving behind the real one who was so scared that he almost peed his pants in a daze. Ha! Arthas did not understand what had happened. The Elven Prince that he had captured exploded. Bang! There was a loud explosion. Fool's head and face were covered in dust from the explosion. At this moment, everyone could see that what he had pulled over was a mage's living bomb. Duque patted the prince's shoulder, who was still in shock, and said seriously, "Explosions are art." Chapter 746. Duque's spell did not deal much damage, not even as much as a swing from Grom's axe. What a slap in the face. Arthas had plotted and finally found a chance to kill off one of the enemy mages. Not only was he stopped, he even pulled a bomb over? Even though he no longer cared about his appearance after becoming a Death Knight, he still lost face when his face was charred black. Arthas felt wronged. He immediately roared. It seemed like he only roared because his throat was itchy. Only Xueqi, with a special vision of the system elf, could see the faint green light. Damn! Is this idiot releasing the plague? Dispel! Actually, even without Xueqi's order, the two holy knights were already doing it. The holy light chased away the hidden plague on the orc hero, but it could not get rid of the plague bacteria in the air. At this time, Xueqi made his move again. An ice tornado with a diameter of tens of meters rose up in an instant. The ice tornado itself did not have much lethality, but everyone could feel that the surrounding air had cleared up. There was no longer the thick stench of blood on the battlefield, as if one was swimming in blood plasma. There was also no longer the faint nauseating stench of plague dust that was spreading. All that was left in the air was the refreshing holy light aura that the two holy knights exuded. Now, even an idiot knew that Arthas's move had been countered by Xueqi once again. Orgrim wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in the ancient shaman language, "Guile, watch carefully. Watch how Xueqi pushes his prey into the abyss step by step. This method of killing the prey with the least cost is something you must learn to become a qualified leader." Thrall's pupils shrank. That's right. It did not matter if the Horde would still fight against the Alliance after this battle. The only thing they could be sure of was that the Horde was no longer the large horde that seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers. The orcs were indeed a powerful and brave race, but they only had a little over 100,000 orcs. If they fought another 2 battles of this level, they would all be wiped out. He had to admit that Xueqi's fighting style was the most suitable for the beast men to survive in. At this time, Sal had not cultivated the path of shamanism, and as a warrior, his martial arts were far from the peak. Therefore, although he was holding the line, he was actually working hard to learn the path of battle and the path of control. On the other side, after the Elven Prince began to use accurate magic to support the few vanguards, Arthas finally fell into a difficult situation. It was one thing for Xueqi to make a move from time to time, but there was also Antonidas by Xueqi's side. Even if this chairman Kirin Tor was old, a Breaking Dawn mage was still a Breaking Dawn mage. He represented the highest battle power in the mortal world, so how could he be ignored? For a moment, Arthas was extremely hesitant. She didn't know if she should play that card. Right at this moment, Xueqi said leisurely, "Have you locked onto it?" "Got it." Antonidas raised his white beard, exuding the aura of a Breaking Dawn wizard. "Then I'll have to trouble you, master." Xueqi bowed. "For the Alliance." As soon as he finished speaking, Antonidas used Flash and crossed a distance of 200 meters, suddenly appearing in the middle of a large group of zombies and ghouls. If it were a mortal, it would be courting death. For a powerhouse of his level, this was the stage where he could use magic wantonly. An ordinary wizard's Frost Nova could only cover a distance of a few meters. Antonidas' Frost Nova, on the other hand, was like throwing a 10,000-ton boulder into a wide, calm lake. What it raised was an exaggerated ice storm wave that was at least 15 meters high. Whoosh! Within a radius of 100 meters, regardless of whether it was the weak zombies, skeleton soldiers, ghouls, or the stronger cave demons and gargoyles, or even the semi-spiritual banshees, they were all turned into solid ice sculptures by this ultimate move of Antonidas. Whoosh! An ice storm blew. In the violent cold wind, the Breaking Dawn mage's robes fluttered in the wind, making a loud sound. The ice sculptures a moment ago shattered into ice shards in the next moment and were blown away by the strong wind. Then, a huge winged creature that didn't exist in the first place was blasted out of thin air. It was a humanoid creature that was more than 5 meters tall, with a pair of huge purplish-blue bat wings. It was wearing a blue armor with silver edges. Seeing the curved goat horns on its head, a shocking name popped into everyone's mind: Dreadlord. In the Burning Legion's endless expansion, conquest, and destruction, many races had joined the Burning Legion, and the Dreadlord race was one of the best. These horned creatures were not any weaker than Eridar's elite warriors. After tens of thousands of years, they had completely integrated into the Burning Legion and played the role of high-ranking commanders in the entire Legion. This Dreadlord seemed to be surprised that he was blasted out. Then, with a sinister smile, he placed his left hand on his chest and gave Antonidas a noble greeting. "Greetings, human powerhouse. I am the Dreadlord Kesronatir. May I have the honor of hearing your name?" He was so polite that people could not help but associate this ugly dreadlord with those nobles' butlers. Antonidas coldly snorted, "You will know my name before you die." After saying that, he waved his wand and a shocking wave of ice instantly swept towards the dreadlord. In the next second, one human and one demon, the two of them began a chase. In the blink of an eye, no one knew where the two of them had gone. At this moment, Xueqi finally strode into the battlefield as if he was strolling in his own backyard. "Yo, Arthas! I'll give you one last chance. If you can still beg for reinforcements from your Lich King master, then hurry up. Otherwise, when I start, you won't have a chance anymore." That was absolute confidence. And absolute arrogance. Beside them, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were fighting fiercely. Every moment, every minute, every second, there were lives being lost, and then they were being devoured by the power of the canopy of undead. A moment ago, they were brothers. A moment later, they were enemies. It was clearly such a chaotic and disorderly battle situation. But when it came to Xueqi, it felt as if nothing in the world could escape Xueqi's calculations, and everything would fall into his hands. Sal tightly gripped the steel axe in his right hand, his left hand clenched into a fist. His surroundings were covered in frost, and in this cold atmosphere, Sal found himself sweating. It turned out that this was the Duke Marcus who single-handedly reversed the war by destroying 1 million beast men and destroying 1 million beast men. Chapter 747. Snowballing was a great skill to learn. Just like how the world's tycoons played with money before Xueqi traveled to this world, some things would develop on their own even if they didn't want to. Of course, Xueqi could choose not to fight Arthas here and go back to recruit soldiers. A month later, it wouldn't be a problem for him to summon an army of 300,000. But by then, Arthas might have already built up enough power to drag tens of millions of zombies all over the Lordaeron continent. Quantitative change could easily lead to qualitative change. When Arthas had more immortals, a lot of black technology that should have appeared in history would naturally be born. For example, the super monsters that were as tall as 3 people and made from dozens of corpses. The Abomination. The Abomination had thick legs and round arms. Its mountain-like body was even bigger than the dwarf steam tank. And because it was a collection of multiple human corpses, its life that was constructed from negative energy was also a composite life form. If the lives of all the immortals on its body were not reduced to 0, it would be impossible to destroy this monster. Therefore, the Scourge Army's snowballing ability was much stronger than the Alliance and the Horde. Xueqi knew very well how disgusting the Scourge Army was. Whether it was a Lich or a Death Knight, as long as their souls weren't destroyed, they could be resurrected. But it didn't matter. As long as he killed Arthas once, he could plant the shadow of failure in the fool's heart. Just like what Xueqi did to Orgrim. In this way, every time Arthas fought against Xueqi, he would become less and less confident. Even if his strength kept increasing, he couldn't escape the curse of Xueqi is undefeatable. That was why Xueqi had to fight Arthas even though he didn't have enough people around him. Xueqi entered the arena. With an invincible arrogance. Thrall took a deep breath. He wanted to open his eyes wide and see if the rumors were deceiving his ears, or if Xueqi was about to shine brightly and blinded his eyes. Xueqi didn't say he wanted to fight one-on-one, so the other vanguards naturally wouldn't back down. In fact, if Xueqi didn't enter the arena, their situation would only get worse. The one who had the deepest impression of this was Rexer. He lacked a powerful weapon, so it was almost impossible for him to deal any fatal damage to Arthas. The two paladins were about the same. Their epic tier weapons were nothing more than an itch to Arthas' Death Knight armor, which was formed by the power of darkness. Only Orgrim's Doomhammer and Grom's Bloodhowl could deal moderate damage to her. When the Dreadlord appeared, everyone was shocked. Originally, everyone thought that the weaker Xueqi would deal with the Dreadlord, while the more powerful Antonidas would deal with Arthas. Who knew they would be swapped? Xueqi had his own difficulties. Although Antonidas was strong, the problem was that he specialized in ice magic. Against a Death Knight that was proficient in the ice element, he wouldn't be able to gain an advantage. In a sense, even the Elven Prince was more useful than Antonidas against Arthas. Xueqi left Kael, that's behind. Alright, now that they had cut off the strongest Death Knight's external help, and also cut off his life and energy recovery cycle, did this mean that they could get rid of Arthas? No. Arthas, who had gathered incalculable power of darkness, was still at the peak of the unreachable cliff in everyone's eyes. To be honest, if Xueqi couldn't come up with an effective plan, even Orgrim wanted to retreat. No matter what, this cross-race, cross-faction alliance was still too fragile. At this moment, Xueqi made his move. The moment he made his move, Kael was shocked. The High Elves thought of themselves as the ancestors of human magic. Even if they didn't say it out loud, they always thought that they were the ancestors of magic, and that their magic was the strongest. Even someone as strong as Antonidas was just walking the old path of the elves, reaching the end of the road in one go. It was obvious that Duke had taken a completely different path from the traditional magic field. He wasn't a native, and after seeing the prosperous world, he didn't have the concentration to focus on one thing. He couldn't be as proficient in arcane magic as Ronan, and he couldn't play with ice magic like Antonidas and Jaina. But Xueqi had something that all the mages in this world didn't have, the system elf. This meant that if Xueqi wanted to play something, to be able to do what others couldn't, it would all depend on this. Countless portals that looked like portals suddenly bloomed in the space around and above Xueqi. Anyone who wasn't a mage would think that these were real. Only Kael, immediately sensed the strange aura on these so-called portals. Portals that didn't have spatial fluctuations? In the next moment, countless figures stepped out of the portal, each of them holding a dazzling weapon in their hands. They suddenly appeared in the empty sky and land. Unsheathed swords, sturdy hammers, exquisite staffs, bright knives. Every weapon had unique shiny decorations. Not only that, but they also constantly emitted magic fluctuations that couldn't be hidden. It was obvious that they weren't ordinary weapons. They could only be high-level weapons. It was very likely that most of them were epic weapons. No, there was no need for that. They were all epic weapons. Massacre Sword, Titan's Blade, Warmonger. These people wielding all sorts of epic melee weapons seemed to be heroic spirits, but they were all fakes. More than 100 fake heroic spirits formed a huge circular defense line, killing all the Undying that attempted to rush within 100 meters of Arthas. At the same time, countless elven archers appeared in the sky. Although they all had different hairstyles and appearances, and outsiders could easily have facial blindness when they looked at the elves, Kael felt dizzy when he saw them. Damn, where did so many Aurelia and Sasha come from? Xueqi, why did you create so many copies of your own women? The second batch that came out were also illusions that Xueqi made with the system elf. The people were illusions, and the weapons in his hands were naturally illusions as well, but they looked so real. Loengaru, Heartbreaker Bow, Heartstriker, Huhuran Thorn, Dragon's Breath Cannon. The moment they appeared, they immediately stood in the air and used the long-range weapons in their hands to attack Arthas. The third batch was the trump card. 1 Jaina, 2 Jainas, many Jainas. The illusion of Jaina, wearing robes of 7 different colors, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. All held staffs and bombarded Arthas with magic. No, Second Fool was going crazy. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.